Welcome back, night travelers. You've found your way again to the Midnight Vault, where the clock stopped whispering and the dark remembers what we tried to forget. Tonight's broadcast contains 5 cases, 5 quiet hauntings that never made the headlines. Each one ordinary at first glance. A perfect test score, a hallway of mirrors, a forgotten nursery, a collector's obsession, and one candle that refused to go out. They're not tales of gore or screaming specters. They're about the small things that stay behind the echo, the shadow, the single heartbeat that never learns how to stop. So dim the lights, turn the volume low, and if you still believe there's comfort in silence, listen closer, because silence, too, has a pulse. The perfect score. They said the test was only 30 questions, 30 small chances to prove whether you were bright, careless, or simply not trying hard enough. Nathan pressed his pencil too hard on every one of them. You could tell from the grooves left behind, the faint scars that tore through the paper's surface. He was 14, quiet, thin, a boy who always adjusted his desk until it matched the tiles beneath him. Order was the only language he knew for peace. Fear was the accent he couldn't unlearn. That Friday, the classroom smelled of chalk dust and wet umbrellas. Rain had started just before the last bell, drumming on the windows while everyone rushed to leave. Nathan stayed behind. His head was bent so low over the final problem that the shadow of his hair touched the page. Mr. Heller, his math teacher, stacked the finished tests into a neat pile. "Clock's up, Nathan. I just need to check my work," he said without looking up. His voice was almost a whisper, careful not to disturb the numbers. The teacher sighed. "You've done enough. Leave it here with the others." But Nathan hesitated. "I'll hand it in myself," he murmured. "Please, I don't want it mixed up." It wasn't being difficult. It was ritual. If he could place the paper into the teacher's tray with his own hands, maybe it would be perfect not just in numbers, but in meaning. He circled his final answer, wrote his name across the top, Nathanar. Conlian looked at it for a long moment, as if seeing himself there made him real. When he finally left the classroom, the hallway stretched out before him, long and empty, humming faintly under fluorescent light. The floor smelled of wax and cleaning spray. Far away, a janitor pushed a mop bucket that squeaked on every turn. Nathan's shoes made small sounds that felt too loud in the stillness. He walked past lockers painted the color of old pennies, past the mural the art club had abandoned halfway through. The office door stood at the end of the hall, marked faculty. Inside, the air was warm, dry, heavy with coffee and printer ink. On a metal tray labeled "Grading to be collected," he placed his test on top of the others. He lined it carefully with the edge of the stack, until no corner dared to stick out. Then he breathed out. For a second, he imagined what it would feel like to see his score posted on the board next week. 100%. His parents' faces bright with pride instead of worry. The thought made him lighter. He turned toward the door. The rain outside had strengthened. He could hear it even through the walls. The building's lights flickered once, a lazy pulse. Down the hall, the janitor's humming stopped. Nathan paused, waiting for it to return, but the only sound was the rain tapping the glass. He adjusted the straps of his backpack and started for the exit. Halfway there, he noticed the bulletin board. Sheets of paper crowded at club schedules, missing homework lists, sports results, and in the center, a new page, printed neatly in bold letters, perfect scores. Term 2, 10 names. Alphabetical order. His wasn't one of them. He read the list twice, then a third time, slower. The date at the bottom was today. His chest tightened. Maybe it was last term's list. Maybe they hadn't updated it. But the paper looked fresh, still crisp at the corners, the ink dark. The more he stared, the smaller the hallway seemed to grow around him. He touched the paper lightly, tracing the edge of it as if his name might be hiding in the fibers. Nothing. Rain pounded harder against the windows. A low groan rolled through the building pipes, or maybe wind, or something that had been waiting too long to be heard. He stepped back and started walking faster. The corridor seemed longer now, stretching ahead of him like a mirror that refused to end. When he reached the exit, the overhead lights went out, one by one, until only the red glow of the exit sign remained. He pushed through the door and stepped into the storm. That was the last moment anyone saw him alive. Later they would say he ran into the road without looking, chasing something blown away by the wind. They found his backpack near the crosswalk, textbooks soaked through, sandwich uneaten, pencils scattered like thin bones. The test paper was gone. A young officer mentioned seeing a sheet of white drifting under the parked cars before the ambulance came. He assumed it was trash. The rain carried it away before he could check. Years afterward, when the school repainted the hall, the workers sanded down the bulletin board. Beneath a new coat of paint, they found faint marks in the plaster, pressed deep by a hard pencil. When they shone a flashlight at an angle, they could just read the imprint. Nathan R. Conley. 100%. They painted over it quickly. Schools prefer their ghosts invisible. Still, the night custodian sometimes hears the faint scratch of a pencil somewhere down the dark hallway. Steady, rhythmic, like someone rechecking an answer that was already right. Perfection, he says. Never these quietly. The storm did not stop that night. It lingered, heavy and reluctant, as if the sky itself was unwilling to move past what it had witnessed. By dawn, the roads were covered in a thin film of mud and paper fragments, receipts, wrappers, torn notebook pages, all plastered against the asphalt, like discarded thoughts. Among them drifted one clean white sheet. It tumbled along the curb, flipping and spinning with the breeze, until it caught under the bumper of a car parked behind the old brick apartment complex on Holloway Street. The edges curled with damp, but the writing on it remained crisp. In the top corner, in careful handwriting, the name Nathan R. Conley. Mark Dobson found it 2 days later, wedged between the tire and the concrete. He was the night guard for the building, a job that required more coffee than courage. 43, soft around the edges, a man whose life had settled into quiet corners. He had worked that same shift for almost 5 years, clocking in at 10 p.m., locking the back gate, then spending the night in the security booth, watching an endless stream of parking lot footage. He liked the silence of it. Silence was easy to manage, people weren't. That Tuesday evening, as the rain slowed to a drizzle, Mark stepped out of his booth to stretch. The air smelled of damp earth and old oil. His flashlight beam danced across the puddles, catching the reflection of something white tucked under a car. He bent down and pulled it free. A single sheet of paper, faintly water-stained, but perfectly legible. Questions, numbers, and answers filled the page in tight, neat lines. At the top, that name. He frowned. Nathan Conley. The name rang a faint bell. He'd heard it on the local news a few nights before, something about a student, an accident. He hadn't paid much attention. The paper felt heavier than it should have, as though the rain hadn't just soaked it but saturated it with something else, something that clung to his skin even after he brushed his fingers off on his pants. He turned it over, expecting more writing, but the back was blank. He almost threw it in the trash. Almost. Instead, he folded it once, placed it on the desk beside his coffee mug, and went back to watching the monitors. The parking lot, usually empty by midnight, held only 3 cars that night. A rusted sedan, a delivery van, and his own beat-up hatchback near the gate. The faint, static hum of the cameras filled the booth, broken only by the occasional gust of wind rattling the thin window glass. It was around 12:47 when he noticed the paper had moved. He hadn't touched it, hadn't opened the door. Yet the folded test now lay a few inches closer to him than before, one corner slightly lifted, as if an invisible draft had disturbed it. Mark stared for a long moment, waiting for it to shift again. When it didn't, he exhaled and chuckled under his breath. Jesus, I need sleep. He picked up the paper, smoothed the crease, and set it back. But then came the faintest sound, something like graphite scratching on paper. It was soft, intermittent, barely audible over the low buzz of the monitors. He froze. The sound continued, slow and steady. Skirt pause, skirt pause. He looked down. The paper lay flat, untouched. He leaned closer. The noise stopped, His own reflection in the dark monitor glass looked back at him. Tired eyes, unshaven jaw, the kind of face that believed in logic because the alternative was too expensive. When the noise started again, he stood abruptly, his chair creaking behind him. The paper hadn't moved this time, but now a faint line crossed the margin, one that hadn't been there before. A tiny mark, as if a pencil had dragged itself just once across the surface. Mark's stomach tightened. He brushed a hand over it, half expecting the line to smudge, but it was pressed deep into the fiber. He set the paper aside, closed his notebook, and reached for his coffee mug. It had gone cold. Outside, the rain started again, soft but insistent. Drops streaked the glass, distorting the yellow glow of the parking lamps. When he finally looked back at the test paper, the name on top was different. The handwriting was the same, precise, neat, but the letters no longer spelled Nathan R. Conley. They spelled Mark Dobson. He dropped the paper. His pulse jumped in his throat. He told himself he was overtired, that maybe the ink had run, or he'd misread it, or maybe he'd written his own name on something earlier and confused it in the dim light. But when he picked it up again, his name was still there. Clean, dry, perfect. He tore the paper in half and threw it into the trash bin. Then he sat down and stared at the monitors again, forcing his eyes to stay open, forcing the world to stay normal. A few minutes later, he heard footsteps, light, deliberate, just outside the booth. He leaned forward, peering through the window. The parking lot was empty. Rain rippled across the asphalt like silver threads. The footsteps stopped. A long silence followed. Then came a faint knock on the booth door. He hesitated. It was almost 1 a.m. No one should be there. The knock came again, gentle, polite, like a student knocking on a teacher's desk. Mark's hand hovered over the handle. His mind tried to arrange the logic of it. Maybe a tenant had forgotten their keys. Maybe a drunk delivery driver. Maybe the wind knocking loose debris. He opened the door an inch. No one stood there. Only the empty lot and the faint hiss of rain. But something pale moved near the edge of his vision. A shape crouched by the last car in the row. For a second, he thought it was a child. Thin shoulders, a bowed head, dark hair plastered to the skull. "Hey," he called. His voice cracked. The shape didn't move. He stepped out, rain soaking his jacket almost instantly. The cold air tasted of metal and exhaust. "You can't be here," he said, trying to sound firm. Still no movement. He took a few cautious steps forward, his flashlight beam trembling slightly in his hand. The light cut across the lot, catching the puddles, the concrete, the curve of the car's fender. The space behind it was empty. No child, no shape. Mark lowered the flashlight. For a moment, the rain softened. He could hear his own breathing again, heavy and uneven. Then, from behind him, a voice, quiet, flat. "Sir, do I have to do it again?" He turned sharply, light slicing through the rain, but the booth window only reflected his own face, distorted, pale, eyes wide. The paper lay on the desk inside, perfectly whole again. He backed away from the door, heart pounding, and reached into his pocket for his phone. His fingers were slick with rain. The screen refused to unlock. The light flickered once and died. He looked up. The parking lamps along the far wall buzzed, dimmed, then flared again. In that brief darkness between the flicker, he saw him just for a second standing by the booth window, a boy in a soaked school uniform, clutching something in his hands. Mark blinked, and the space was empty. He stumbled back into the booth, locked the door, and sat down hard. His breath fogged the glass. The paper was still there, unburned, untorn. His name was gone again. Nathan's had returned. At the bottom of the page, written in small new letters, was a single line: "Please grade fairly." Mark stared at it until his eyes blurred. The letters were carved deep enough that his fingertip caught on them. He folded the paper slowly, slid it into the drawer, and closed it. He didn't leave the booth again that night. But as dawn crawled across the sky, pale and gray. The smell of pencil shavings filled the air, faint but sharp, like the memory of a classroom that no longer existed. When his shift ended at 6, he stepped outside to stretch his legs. The parking lot gleamed clean after the rain. The cars were gone. The puddles were gone. Only one thing remained: a single pencil lying near the booth door. The wood was worn down to half its length, the eraser rubbed to nothing. He picked it up and turned it in his fingers. The side was engraved in small block letters, NRC, 8th grade. He dropped it. It rolled across the pavement and stopped at his foot, perfectly aligned with his boot tip. Mark left it there. He didn't look back until he reached his car, and when he did, he thought he saw the booth light flicker one last time, as if someone inside had just sat down to start grading papers again. The human mind has a way of sanding down the edges of what it can't explain. A few nights of sleep, a few hours of daylight, and the impossible begins to sound like exaggeration. Mark told himself that's all it was: the storm, the darkness, the fatigue of working too many night shifts. The paper, the voice, the boy in the rain, they blurred together into something almost reasonable. By Thursday, he had convinced himself of it. He sat in his kitchen that afternoon, a lukewarm mug of coffee in one hand, staring at the folded newspaper that had been left on his doorstep. On the front page, a small photograph: local teen dies in accident near Westbrook High. The image was grainy, the boy's face soft and unsure. Beneath it, a caption: Nathan R., Conley 14, remembered by classmates as quiet and hardworking. Mark closed the paper. He didn't like the way the eyes in that picture seemed to follow him. That evening, before leaving for work, he hesitated by the drawer where he'd hidden the test. It was still there, folded exactly as he'd left it. The edges looked crisper, though. Dry. Too dry for a paper that had once been soaked by rain. He considered throwing it out again, but something about it, maybe guilt, maybe curiosity, kept him from doing it. Instead, he locked the drawer and headed out into the night. The sky was clear for the first time in days. The air felt washed clean, though the lot still glistened from earlier rain. The lamps hummed steadily. The world looked normal again. Inside the booth, everything was as he'd left it. Monitors glowing faintly, coffee pot half full, the chair creaking in its familiar rhythm. He sat down and exhaled. For a moment, he even smiled at how ordinary everything felt. Then he noticed the drawer. It was open. Just a few inches, enough to show the edge of the paper peeking out, like a corner of a secret that wanted to be seen. Mark froze, every muscle tightening. He hadn't touched that drawer since Tuesday. He was sure of it. He stood, approached the desk slowly, and looked down. The paper was gone. The drawer was empty, except for a faint residue of pencil dust. He brushed a finger through it, feeling the fine grit cling to his skin. He looked around the booth, under the desk, on the chair, behind the monitors, nothing. For a long while, he sat back down and stared out into the parking lot, watching the soft shimmer of the streetlights on the asphalt. He told himself a cleaner must have taken it, or maybe the paper had stuck to his sleeve and fallen somewhere outside. But the thought didn't settle. It hovered in his mind like a buzzing insect he couldn't swat away. At 11:13 p.m., the first sound came. A faint, tapping, rhythmic, deliberate, coming from the far corner of the booth. He turned his head slowly. The sound stopped. He waited, listening. Tap, 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 like the slow tick of a pen against a desk. He stood, moved toward the corner, crouched, and checked the floor. Nothing. The tapping resumed behind him, near the monitors. It spun around. The paper lay there, centered neatly on the desk. He hadn't seen it appear. One moment, the desk was bare. The next, it was waiting for him. The top half looked the same: questions, calculations, the name Nathan R. Conley. But below that, faint pencil marks had begun to fill the margins. Words, not equations. Do you know what's fair? Mark stared, unable to move. A thin shiver crept up his neck. He could hear the blood in his ears. He reached out, fingers trembling, and turned the paper over. On the back, more writing, faint and slanted. I did everything right. They said the answers mattered. They said if I was perfect, they'd love me. His throat went dry. The letters looked fresh. No ink bleeding, no smudges. It was as if the hand that wrote them had finished only moments ago. He dropped the page back onto the desk and backed away until his shoulders hit the glass wall of the booth. His reflection stared back at him, pale, sweating, small in the fluorescent glow. "I'm not part of this," he muttered. "I didn't even know you." Again, but the room seemed to listen. The monitors flickered once, showing static, then stabilized. On the top right screen, camera 4, the one facing the main gate, showed a figure standing just beyond the pool of lamplight. A thin boy, soaked to the knees, holding something close to his chest. Mark's stomach turned to ice. He leaned closer. The figure's face was indistinct, blurred by the grain of the camera. But the posture, the slightly hunched shoulders, the bowed head was unmistakably young. He reached for the intercom button. "Hey, you can't be here." The boy didn't move. Mark grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside. The air had grown colder, the kind of cold that carries no breeze, only stillness. He pointed the beam toward the gate. Nothing. The space was empty. When he looked back at the booth, the paper was pressed against the inside of the glass, fluttering slightly, though the air was still. He returned to the booth slowly, every instinct screaming to leave, to drive away, to quit the job and never come back. But curiosity dragged him closer. He peeled the paper from the glass. The words on it had changed again. "Please help me. They think I cheated." The sentence pulsed faintly, as if written in heat instead of graphite. He could almost feel it through the paper. His voice trembled when he whispered, "Who thinks you cheated?" Silence. Then the low hum of the monitors deepened. For a moment, every screen went black. Then they all lit up at once, each showing a different view of the same thing. A classroom. The desks were arranged in neat rows. A teacher's shadow moved slowly between them. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The room looked empty except for one seat, front and center, where a boy sat motionless, pencil in hand. Nathan. Mark stared. He couldn't look away. The boy lifted his head, eyes hollow, and looked directly into the camera, directly at him. "Sir," the voice said, though no sound came through the speakers. "Do I have to do it again?" Mark stumbled backward, knocking the chair over. The image flickered, then vanished. The screens returned to the grainy feet of the parking lot. He sank onto the floor, hands pressed against his temples. "This isn't real," he whispered. "This isn't real." But the air around him shifted. It felt charged, almost electric, like the moment before a storm breaks. The faint scent of burnt paper filled the booth. When he looked up, the paper on the desk had begun to smoke. The edges curled inward, blackening, yet no flame appeared. It was burning without fire, the words evaporating into ash. He reached for it instinctively, but when his fingers brushed the surface, the burning stopped. The page was whole again. Only one new sentence remained. "You failed me." He stepped back, heart pounding so hard it made his vision blur. He didn't remember leaving the booth. He didn't remember locking the gate or driving home. The next thing he knew, he was sitting in his car outside his apartment, hands gripping the steering wheel, the paper still in his lap. He didn't know how it got there. He left it on the passenger seat and stumbled upstairs. The hallway lights buzzed as he passed, one by one. He fumbled with his keys, finally pushed the door open, and stopped dead. On his kitchen table lay his coffee mug, and beside it, the same folded test paper. Dry, uncreased, waiting. He sank into a chair, staring at it, too exhausted to scream, too terrified to touch it. All night he sat there, the sound of a pencil faintly scratching somewhere in the dark apartment. By dawn, the noise stopped. He looked at the paper again. It was blank, completely white, but as he turned it toward the light, faint impressions began to appear, the ghost of words pressed deep into the fibers. Fairness is an equation. You're the variable. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years he prayed. Not for peace, not for safety, just for the night to end. When he opened them again, the paper was gone. Only the smell of burning lingered. And in the distance far below, from the parking lot he'd abandoned, came the sound of a pencil tapping, slow and steady, counting out the seconds between guilt and judgment. Mark didn't remember falling asleep, but when he woke, the light outside his window had turned the color of old paper gray and dry, like something that had been erased too many times. The first thing he noticed was the silence, not the ordinary kind, but a silence that listens back. His coffee table was bare. The test paper was gone again, though the faint scent of burnt wood still hovered in the air. The smell clung to him, to the curtains, to the skin of the apartment like invisible dust. He went through his morning by instinct. Half-present shower, toast, coffee, the small routines that gave a life shape. But every sound he made, felt, grated. The toaster's click, the faucet drip, the creak of his chair, all of it arrived with an echo, as if someone somewhere was keeping score. By the time the sun fell, he had convinced himself he'd imagined it all. The paper, the voice, the dream of the parking lot glowing under invisible rain. He'd show up to work, check the gates, drink his coffee, and prove that the world hadn't tilted. When he arrived at the lot that night, the air was oddly warm, as though the day hadn't truly ended. The lamps buzzed too softly, their glow thick and yellow. He unlocked the booth, expecting the familiar stale smell of coffee and dust, but the air that met him was colder than the hallway of a morgue. The monitors were already on. Each screen showed a different feed. Empty corridors, the main gate, the stairwell leading to the basement, but the timestamps on all of them were wrong. They weren't showing the present. They were showing the same hour, 7:45 a.m., repeated across every corner of the lot. He touched one of the screens. The image rippled, like a reflection disturbed by a stone. Beneath the glass, faint pencil scratches appeared, crisscrossing the display marks of something writing from inside the screen. He jerked his hand back. The paper lay waiting on the desk, no longer folded, perfectly flat, its edges aligned with the edges of the table. At first glance, it looked the same as before, but a new section had appeared below the last line of numbers. A single heading written in large, deliberate strokes, final evaluation. Below it, 5 empty boxes and a column of neat labels. Obedience, honesty, effort, remorse, fairness. The space beside each label waited for a grade. Mark whispered, "What do you want from me?" The booth hummed softly. Somewhere deep in the wiring, a steady tap began a mechanical rhythm too precise to be random. He picked up the pencil that sat beside the paper. He didn't remember leaving it there, but it was his handwriting carved faintly into the wood. The initials, MD, looked older than they should. He tried to drop the pencil, but his fingers tightened around it on their own, a subtle pressure that felt borrowed. The first box darkened. A soft graphite shade filled itself in, letter by letter. Obedience, A. His pulse jumped. "Stop," he said quietly. The pencil moved again, not in his hand, but under it, dragging itself across the paper like something breathing through his skin. Honesty, F. Hess stared, unable to move. The tapping from the monitors grew louder. With every beat, another word formed. Effort, B+. Remorse, D. And finally, fairness. Incomplete. Mark's breath caught. He felt a weight behind him, a pressure like a held gaze. He didn't turn immediately. When he finally did, the booth was filled with light so faint it seemed to come from nowhere, pale and cold, like the residue of lightning. Nathan stood by the door. He looked younger than the photograph in the newspaper, his face soft, wet hair clinging to his forehead. His eyes were the color of chalk dust. "I did everything right," the boy said. His voice was thin, careful, like he was afraid of breaking the words. "I showed my work. I didn't cheat." Mark's lips trembled. "I know." Then why do they say I did?" "I don't..." He stopped. The words tangled in his throat. "It isn't fair." Nathan tilted his head slightly, as though testing the phrase on his tongue. "It isn't fair," he repeated. "You understand?" "I do. For a heartbeat. Something softened in the boy's expression, a flicker of relief, almost human. Then it was gone. "Then you'll help me," Nathan said. "You'll correct the score." "How?" The boy looked toward the monitors. Each one flickered, and the classroom returned the same room from before. Desks in perfect rows, empty chairs, a single test paper on the front desk waiting. "Grade it," Nathan said simply. Mark stepped closer to the monitors. His reflection merged with the image. The pencil in his hand felt heavier, the wood warmer. He looked down. His desk was no longer the booth's metal surface, but an old wooden tabletop. The smell of chalk and eraser shavings filled his lungs. The hum of the parking lot vanished, replaced by the distant murmur of a school hallway. He blinked once, and the booth was gone. He sat at a teacher's desk. The room around him was dim and flickering, like an old film projector skipping frames. The test paper lay in front of him. "Nathan?" The boy stood near the window. The rain outside wasn't falling right. It hung in midair, trembling like the world had forgotten how to move forward. "I just want the truth," Nathan said. "You said you'd help." Mark looked down at the paper. It was covered in answers, each one flawless, precise, like the work of someone desperate to be seen as worthy. He flipped through the pages, perfect arithmetic, clear logic, clean handwriting. And yet, at the top of each page, a red mark bled through the paper. 0. His stomach twisted. He reached for the red pen that had appeared beside him. Its cap was already off. The nib dripped slowly, not ink, but something darker. "Change it," Nathan whispered. Mark hesitated. The pen trembled between his fingers. "If I do this," he said, "will you leave me alone?" Nathan didn't answer. The room darkened further. The chalkboard behind him filled with faint writing sentences overlapping each other, all in Nathan's neat hand. "Do you know what's fair? Do you know what's fair? Do you know?" Mark leaned forward and wrote on the first page. 100%. The ink bled instantly, sinking through the page like a wound. Nathan stepped closer, eyes wide, expression unreadable. "That's better," he said softly. But Mark noticed something on the next sheet. Beneath the faint writing, the questions weren't about math anymore. They were about him. Why didn't you help the man in the elevator when he fell? Why didn't you report the mistake on the paycheck? Why did you look away when you saw the accident? He flipped through the pages faster. Each question was another moment, another failure, another tiny forgettable sin. The last question stopped him cold. "Why did you watch me, Dee?" He froze. "What?" The words blurred. The ink rose from the page like smoke. The air thickened and the classroom began to tilt. Desks slid softly toward him, legs scraping in unison, a slow tide of wood and steel. Nathan's voice came from everywhere now, soft, polite, patient. "You saw it. You were there. You watched." Mark shook his head. "No, I didn't. I didn't even know you. You saw the car. You saw the paper." He remembered. The night of the storm, when he'd found the test under the bumper. The way he'd brushed off the name. The way he'd told himself it wasn't his problem. The boy's eyes sharpened. "You could have told them. You could have given it back." Mark's throat tightened. It wouldn't have changed anything. The desk stopped moving. Silence spread like frost. Nathan stepped closer until their faces were only inches apart. His breath was cold enough to sting. Everything changes when someone decides to care. Mark lowered his head. "I'm sorry." The boy studied him, then slowly placed the test paper on the desk between them. The last line had rewritten itself. Fairness. Pass. For a moment, the air lifted. The pressure eased. The classroom brightened. Not sunlight exactly, but a kind of release. Mark exhaled, shaking, his hands trembling over the paper. When he looked up again, Nathan was gone. The room was empty. He stood, dizzy, and found himself once more in the booth. The monitors showed the quiet parking lot, washed in morning light. Birds moved in the distance. The world had resumed. The paper still lay on the desk, unmarked, ordinary. He touched it. It was blank again, smooth and cool. He sat back in his chair and waited for something: relief, fear, understanding, but what came instead was silence. A deep, steady silence. Not hostile this time, just watchful. He stayed there until his shift ended. When he finally stood, the dawn outside was pale and harmless. The smell of burning was gone. He left the booth door open behind him, and though he didn't look back, he felt it the faintest weight of eyes. Not angry, not even sad, just measuring. Later, when the morning staff arrived, they found the booth empty and clean, the desk wiped bare. Only one thing had been left behind, written neatly on a small post-it note stuck to the monitor. Grade. Complete. No one ever saw Mark Dobson again. But sometimes, on nights when the rain falls the same way it did that week, the booth light flickers. A shadow moves inside, head bent, hand gliding across invisible paper. Careful, deliberate, never stopping, as if still grading the world, one soul at a time. Morning came quietly to Holloway Street. The lot looked the same as it always had. Cracked pavement, yellow lines fading under the first thin light of day. The security booth stood still, its window reflecting nothing but sky. But if you walked close enough, if you pressed your ear to the glass, you might hear it. A soft, scraping sound, gentle, patient, endlessly repeating. By the time the next guard arrived, the door was unlocked. The inside was spotless. Coffee mug washed, monitors humming, chair tucked in. Everything in order, too much order, as if arranged by someone who had memorized the idea of cleanliness but not the feeling of it. No sign of Mark. The supervisor filed a report, called the police, called his sister, called his landlord. His car still sat in the employee space, keys in the ignition. The officers searched the booth, found nothing unusual except for one thing taped to the underside of the desk. A single sheet of paper, blank, but under certain light, faint impressions appeared, grooves pressed deep into the fibers, letters, numbers, a child's handwriting, NRC. 100%. They logged it as personal property and stored it with the missing person file. Weeks passed, then months. People stopped asking about Mark Dobson. The world moved forward, as it always does when something disappears quietly enough. But sometimes, when the night watch changed hands, the new guards would mention strange things. Flickering cameras, faint voices bleeding through the static. The company blamed wiring issues. One technician swore that the booth's timestamp logs reset themselves to 7:45 a.m. every night. The same minute printed on the old surveillance footage the police had taken. Eventually, they stopped keeping anyone on night duty. The lot was automated, gates controlled remotely, lights on a timer. The booth became storage. That should have been the end of it. Years later, the building changed owners. The new property manager, a woman named Elise, decided to renovate the entire structure into student housing. She liked the location close to Westbrook High, affordable, easy to market. The lot hadn't been touched in almost a decade. When the contractors came to tear down the booth, they found it still standing solid, glass unbroken, door perfectly aligned. Inside, the air was bone dry, though no one had entered it in years. And there, on the desk, sat a fresh stack of papers, blank, except for a single line printed at the top of each. Final exam. Fairness. No one claimed responsibility. The papers weren't old. The ink smelled recent. Elise laughed, assumed it was a prank from one of the crew, and threw them away. That night, she dreamed of a parking lot, empty, flooded with light. A boy standing in the middle, holding out a sheet of paper. His mouth moved, but no sound came. She woke before dawn, heart racing, her fingers clenched around the bedsheet as though gripping something delicate. When she opened her hand, there were faint graphite smudges on her skin. She didn't go back to sleep. The renovation finished in late autumn. Students began moving in, tired faces, heavy backpacks, the smell of youth mixed with caffeine and ambition. Among them was a quiet boy named Aaron, 14. He reminded people of someone else, though no one could ever say who. Aaron was serious, polite, always early to class, always last to leave. He loved numbers. He hated mistakes. He'd line up his pencils by length before every quiz. Teachers adored him for his discipline. One afternoon, while helping the janitor carry supplies to the basement, he noticed an old wooden desk pushed against the wall, covered in dust and plastic sheeting. Something about its shape tugged at him. He brushed away the dust, revealing the faint outline of a label burned into the top corner. Security. He opened the drawer. Inside lay one sheet of paper. Not white anymore, but yellowed. Fragile. At the top, in faded pencil, final valuation. 5 boxes. 5 labels. Aaron smiled faintly, thinking it was some kind of old survey. He picked up the pencil lying beside it, its eraser gone. Initials carved into the side. MD. He filled the first box almost playfully, pressing harder than he meant to. The graphite line looked darker than it should have. When he lifted his hand, the pencil mark gleamed faintly, as if wet. A sound came then, soft, rhythmic. From somewhere behind him, the gentle tap, tap, tap of another pencil against wood. He turned. Nothing. The room smelled faintly of rain. He looked back at the page. His name had appeared at the top, not written by him, but by something that knew exactly how he formed each letter. The first label changed itself. Obedience A. Aaron laughed nervously. Okay. Funny. He dropped the pencil and backed away. But the tapping continued. Faster now. He turned and ran up the basement steps. By the time he reached the hallway, his palms were streaked with graphite dust. Over the following weeks, small things began to happen around the building. The intercom system would buzz late at night, though no one was at the front desk. The automatic lights in the hallways flickered every day at exactly 7:45 a.m. The janitor swore he heard a child's voice echoing faintly through the vents, reciting numbers like a countdown. Students laughed it off. Urban legends form easily in old places, but Aaron stopped laughing. He started keeping his pencils in a locked box. He never stayed late at school anymore, until the night before finals. His parents were working late. The building was quiet, humming only with the low vibration of heaters and distant pipes. Aaron sat at his desk, trying to focus on his math review. The numbers blurred. Every few minutes, he'd hear it. That soft, scratching sound, as though someone behind him was writing faster, more confidently, more perfectly than he could ever manage. When he finally turned, there was only the window and his reflection staring back. But something about the reflection's hand was wrong. It was holding a pencil. He looked down. His own hands were empty. The reflection moved first. It began writing on the glass, each line appearing in thin silver frost. Do your best, Aaron. They're watching. He stepped closer, breath fogging the glass. Who's watching? The letters wiped themselves away. Then a new line appeared, slower this time. You can still pass. Just finish the test. A chill spread through him, something deeper than fear. He looked down at his desk. A single sheet of paper lay there, clean, white, waiting. The same words across the top. Final exam. Fairness. He didn't remember printing it. He didn't remember owning paper like that. He stood, backing away, but his chair didn't move with him. It stayed exactly in place, perfectly centered. He turned toward the door, but the handle resisted. Not locked, just unwilling. When he looked back, the desk was empty again. No paper, no pencil, just that same faint smell of burning. At 7:45 the next morning, the first bell rang at Westbrook High. Students filled the halls, loud and bright, alive in the way only teenagers can be. No one noticed the faint flicker in the hallway lights. No one noticed the new sheet of paper pinned to the bulletin board beside the trophy case. Perfect scores. Term 2. 10 names. Alphabetical order. The last one freshly printed. Aaron L. Dobson. 100%. Back at the old parking lot, the booth still stands, though it's hidden now behind the new fencing and overgrown grass. The monitors were removed long ago, the power lines cut, but on some nights, when the air is heavy with the memory of rain, a faint glow seeps through the booth's glass, dull, rhythmic. like the pulse of a tired heart refusing to stop. Inside, a desk waits. On it lies one test paper. The name at the top changes with the seasons. Always neat, always young. The graphite never fades. The world outside doesn't notice. But sometimes, a driver passing on the main road swears they see movement in the glass, a figure bent over a desk, writing patiently. They'll say the same thing every time. He looked like he was almost done. The teachers at Westbrook High like to tell their students that grades don't define them, that perfection is impossible. But even they whisper about the boy who once chased his paper into the rain, the guard who vanished grading it, and the sound of scratching pencils that seems to echo through the building just before exam season. The janitor says he's heard it 3 times now. Always the same rhythm. Skid pause, like a question waiting for its answer. And if you listen closely, when the final bell rings and everyone rushes out into the daylight, you can still hear the faint echo following them down the stairs. Steady, deliberate, patient, the sound of someone making sure they got everything right this time. The sound of a perfect score. The hall of reflection. Elias noticed about the new apartment wasn't the smell of fresh paint or the echo of his own footsteps. It was the hallway. It stretched farther than it should have, long and narrow, with walls painted a dull, ivory white that caught the light strangely. The landlord had told him it was an architectural illusion, that the mirrors lining both sides were meant to make the space feel open, brighter. But when Elias first walked through it, carrying his cardboard boxes, he felt like the air was folding in on itself. The mirrors weren't identical. Some were tall and thin, others square, some slightly tilted as though they'd been adjusted to watch him pass. His reflection multiplied infinitely, receding into the vanishing point. An army of quiet Eliases carrying boxes through an endless hall. He had to look down to move forward. If he looked up too long, the sight of himself disappearing again and again made his stomach churn. The landlord, an older man with a kind, unbothered smile, had laughed when Elias mentioned it. "You'll get used to it," he said. "Everyone does." But Elias wasn't everyone. He'd spent most of his life avoiding his own face. Cameras, shop windows, bathroom mirrors, each carried a kind of quiet hostility. There was something in his reflection he didn't trust. Not hatred, not vanity, something stranger, like the person looking back knew a joke he didn't. When he finally unpacked the last box, night had already fallen. The city outside hummed faintly, a sound like breathing through static. His apartment was small. 1 bedroom, 1 kitchen, 1 view of the neighboring building's brick wall. But it was his. He told himself this would be a new start, a quiet place. He sat on the couch and listened to the refrigerator hum. His hands wouldn't stop trembling. They always did that when the world changed too quickly. He took a deep breath, exhaled, and glanced toward the hallway. From the corner of his eye, something moved. Just a flicker light bending differently, as though one reflection blinked a fraction late. He stood slowly, heart quickening. He walked to the hall, forcing his gaze down, and turned off the overhead light. The mirrors vanished into darkness. That helped. When he went to bed that night, he left every mirror-covered sheets, jackets, even cardboard. But somewhere, beneath the rustle of the city, he still thought he could hear glass breathing. He dreamed of standing in that hallway again. Only this time it wasn't his building, it was a version of it without walls, stretching into black space. The mirrors glowed faintly, each reflecting him, but every reflection stood in a different posture. Some turned away, some smiled faintly. One was whispering. He tried to move closer to that one, to hear what it was saying, but the glass thickened between them, clouding like frost. His reflection leaned closer too, mouthing words he couldn't hear, its lips moving faster and faster. He woke with a gasp. The clock read 3:17 a.m. The room was dark, except for the faint light spilling from under the bedroom door. He hadn't left any lights on. Elias pushed himself up, bare feet against the cold floor. He hesitated, listening. Silence. The kind that feels deliberate. He walked to the door, hand hovering over the handle. The glow from the hallway wasn't steady, it pulsed, faintly, like something alive. When he opened the door, he saw that one of the covers had slipped. A mirror, halfway revealed, leaned against the opposite wall. Its surface shimmered faintly in the light from the kitchen bulb that flickered above. He stepped forward. His reflection stared back, pale, anxious, eyes ringed dark from sleeplessness. He tilted his head slightly. So did the reflection. Nothing strange. He turned to pull the cover back up and saw movement again, not in the mirror facing him, but in the reflection behind that reflection. A copy of him, somewhere deep in the glass, shifting independently. He froze. The deeper reflection raised its hand a heartbeat after his own, not mirrored, but delayed. He felt something inside him lock into place. A quiet, cold recognition. He stepped back into his room, closed the door, and pressed his palms against it until the tremor in his hands subsided. He told himself it was just the lighting, just exhaustion. His anxiety had always played tricks on him, he knew that. Still, he dragged a blanket across the bottom of the door, sealing out the sliver of light from the hall. He didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, the hallway looked normal. The mirrors caught the pale light of dawn and threw it around harmlessly, like water. He made coffee, avoided looking directly at them, and convinced himself the night had been nothing but his own nervous imagination. He even laughed, quietly. The sound startled him. He'd always been told exposure therapy helped facing the thing you feared, allowing your mind to dull its edges. Maybe he'd try it. He stood in front of the nearest mirror and looked at himself for 10 seconds. Then 20. The trick was to keep breathing, to stay present, to remember the difference between the man in the glass and the one looking through it. He counted under his breath. 1, 2, 3. And then, without warning, the reflection blinked on 2, not 3. His heart lurched. He stumbled back, the mug of coffee spilling down his shirt. He gasped, looking again. But now, it was perfectly normal. The face was calm, mimicking his every move. He wiped the spill and muttered to himself, "Get it together, Elias." That day, he left for work early. He didn't come back until after sunset, when the hall had turned into a tunnel of muted reflections. He switched on the light and felt an instant nausea watching the endless repetitions of himself stretch into infinity. He moved quickly, shutting the bedroom door behind him, locking it. That night, he dreamed again. The same hallway. Only now his reflection was closer, pressed right against the glass. Its lips were blue, its breath fogging the surface. When it whispered, he heard it this time. "I'm not you." He woke up to find the sheet covering the mirror at the foot of his bed had fallen. The following morning, Elias avoided the hallway altogether. He slipped through the kitchen window to leave for work. The neighbors stared, but he didn't care. Each night, though, it got harder to avoid. The reflections were multiplying. Not physically, he knew that, but in his head. Every surface caught his face. The kettle, the black glass of the TV, the window at dusk. Each one carried a slightly different detail. A blink too slow. A mouth that lingered on a frown longer than his did. He started speaking aloud just to anchor himself. "That's me. That's still me. But it didn't sound convincing anymore. When he finally returned home one Friday night, exhausted, he found something waiting by the door. A note, taped to the wall. It was his handwriting. "Stop covering the mirrors." He tore it down, heart hammering, and threw it in the trash. Then, as if to defy whatever this was, he ripped down every cover, one by one. Sheets, jackets, cardboard gone. The hallway flooded with light. 1,000 versions of him stood frozen in place, stretching out forever. For a moment, he felt powerful. Then one of them smiled. Not him. The third or fourth reflection down the line, subtle but real, the corners of its mouth curling a fraction too late. Elias whispered, "I see you." And the smile widened. He stumbled backward, knocking over a frame, glass shattering across the floor. The reflection shattered with it, but only for a second, then they reformed, whole again, smooth and silent. He turned off the light, slammed the bedroom door, and pressed his back against it. In the darkness, the sound of glass breathing began again, slow, patient, and somewhere in the black behind the door, a voice whispered soft, almost gentle, "Thank you for looking." Elias covered his ears, but he couldn't stop himself from trembling, because the voice hadn't come from the hallway. It had come from inside the room. The next morning came without sunrise. It was as though the light outside his window refused to commit to the idea of day. Elias sat on the edge of his bed, shirt half button, fingers trembling over the last button that refused to slip into place. It hadn't slipped. Every time his eyes closed, something tugged him back. A pulse of sound, a flash of silver, a shape moving behind his eyelids. His reflection. Always the reflection. He told himself he'd go outside, get air, let the ordinary world flatten everything strange back into routine. But when he stepped into the hallway, the mirrors seemed to hum, faintly, as though they were breathing. He avoided looking directly, but the periphery betrayed him. Faces lined the corridor on both sides, his faces each one slightly wrong. The nearest reflection blinked a heartbeat too slow, the next blinked too fast, the third didn't blink at all. He felt his throat dry. He whispered, "Just walk." He forced himself forward, eyes on the floor, counting each step out loud like an anchor. 14, 15, 16. The sound of his voice didn't match the echoes. Somewhere behind him, another voice, his own, was whispering a different count, off by one. He stopped. The echoes stopped too. He turned toward the nearest mirror and found himself staring into an endless tunnel of versions of himself, stretching backward into darkness. But one version, 5 or 6 reflections deep, stood perfectly still while the others mimicked his slight movements. It was standing too straight. Its eyes were too bright. Elias swallowed hard, stepped closer. The reflection behind that one moved just a twitch at first, then a slow, deliberate tilt of the head that didn't match any of his gestures. He spun and ran back into his room, slammed the door, locked it, and leaned against it, gasping. He could feel the vibration through the wall, the hum of mirrors resonating with something just below hearing range. He stayed inside all day. The walls felt safer than the hallway, but even here the air seemed to shimmer. His laptop screen kept catching his reflection in a way that felt more like surveillance than coincidence. By afternoon, he'd covered every surface again. Aluminum foil over the TV, towels over the windows, the bathroom mirror taped with newspapers. The apartment looked like a crime scene, but at least it was silent. When night came, he sat in the dark, breathing slowly, trying not to think about the hallway. That's when he heard the footsteps. Soft, bar, dragging slightly. He froze. They were coming from the hall. He turned his head toward the door. The knob twitched once, just a tremor, but enough to make the sound of metal grind faintly. He whispered, "Who's there?" Silence. Then a voice, faint but clear, answered from the other side. "You left the light on." Elias' body locked up. He knew that voice. It was his own. The doorknob twisted again. He stumbled backward until his shoulders hit the dresser. The footsteps stopped. He waited. Every second stretched thin and sharp. Then, slowly, the sound of movement returned, but this time, it was behind him. His spawn. The newspaper, covering the bathroom mirror, was trembling, the tape peeling off by itself. He rushed forward, pressed his palms against it, holding it in place. "Stop it!" he shouted. The shaking stilled. He stood there, breathing hard, hands pressed flat against paper until his pulse slowed. Then came a faint, scratching sound from the other side of the glass. Something was writing. He pulled his hands back. The ink bled through the paper in long, looping strokes. "Let me see you." He ripped the paper down before he could stop himself. His reflection stared back, eyes wide, identical, terrified. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Then the reflection smiled, quick and small, like a secret. The smile didn't reach its eyes. Elias stumbled back, bumping into the dresser. The mirror's surface rippled, just once, like a breath on water. The reflection leaned forward slightly, palms pressed against the glass from the inside. Elias shook his head, whispering, "No, no, no, no." The reflection's lips moved, forming the same word, but a fraction too late. He turned, grabbed his jacket, and ran out the front door barefoot. The elevator mirror was covered with fingerprints his own, multiplied 100 times by panic. He stared at them instead of his face, watched them blur as the lift descended. His heartbeat filled the narrow space. When the doors opened, the lobby's glass doors stood waiting, dark and gleaming. Outside, the city was quiet. Streetlights shimmered in puddles left by a late drizzle. Every surface reflected, every window, every car hood, every wet piece of asphalt. There was nowhere he could look that didn't show some version of himself staring back. He stepped into the street and felt suddenly disoriented. The reflections in the shop windows weren't lining up. In one pane, his image was standing still while he walked. In another, it turned its head the wrong way. He started running, head down, shoes slapping against the pavement. His breath fogged the air in short bursts. A voice followed him, soft and rhythmic, like a chant repeated in glass. "You can't leave without me." He ran until his legs burned. When he finally stopped, he realized he'd circled back to his building. The hallway light was on again. He crept inside, exhausted. His apartment door stood open. Inside, the covers he'd hung were gone. Every mirror shone, spotless, catching the pale streetlight through the window. He whispered to no one, "What do you want?" The nearest mirror answered not with sound, but with movement. His reflection stepped closer. It raised its hand, and so did he. But the gesture didn't mirror his. It matched him, the same side, as though they were standing on the same side of the glass. That's when Elias noticed the reflection's arm. The skin along the wrist was marked. A long, thin scar, shaped like an inverted curve. He looked down at his own wrist, unscarred. He whispered, "You're not me." The reflection smiled. "You're right," it said. He didn't hear it through his ears. He heard it inside his chest, like an echo trapped in his ribs. He stumbled backward, knocking over the lamp. The glass surface of the nearest mirror shimmered. From deep within, another light flickered another room. A reverse version of his apartment, mirrored perfectly, yet wrong in its colors, its shadows, its sense of gravity. He saw movement there. A table sliding across the floor by itself, a door opening inward while his opened outward. The reflection stepped closer, placing its hand flat on the glass. Its fingers looked wrong, the thumb on the opposite side. When it spoke again, its voice was barely human. "You've hidden from me long enough." Elias shook his head violently. "Stay there." "I can't." The glass groaned, cracks spidered outward, slow and delicate, like frost spreading on a window pane. The surface bulged inward, and the reflection's hand pushed through skin pale as milk. Veins blew like cracks in ice. He stumbled back, but the hand didn't reach for him. It simply pressed its palm against the air, trembling slightly, as if testing gravity. Then, slowly, it turned its wrist to show him the reversed thumb. "I've waited," it said. Elias backed into the wall. "Why me?" "You called me," the reflection said. "Every time you refused to look, every time you covered me, you made space. You left an opening. I filled it." The cracks deepened. Glass dust fell like snow. Elias lunged forward, grabbed the nearest thing he could, a metal frame, and hurled it at the mirror. The sound split the air. Glass shattered outward, 1,000 shards spinning through the room like silver rain. The reflection's voice fractured with it, scattering into whispers that folded over each other. He stood panting, staring at the broken pieces on the floor. They reflected fragments of him. Eyes, mouth, hands, but not in any order that made sense. Each piece twitched slightly, as if still alive. He pressed his palms to his ears, sank to the floor, and stayed there until the streetlight outside dimmed. When he finally looked up, the largest shard near his foot trembled. A faint ripple passed through it, then a voice whispered from the glass, so soft it almost wasn't there. Now there's more than one of me. Elias screamed and smashed it again with his fist. The fragment cracked into smaller mirrors, each catching a different version of his face, one crying, one laughing, one expressionless. He kicked the pieces under the couch, under the bed, into corners where the light couldn't find them. But even in darkness, he could feel them, tiny, living surfaces waiting to be looked at again. He didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw himself standing in that reverse apartment, his double moving through it, matching every breath. He saw it trace a line across its wrist, leaving the scar. He saw it press its hand against the mirror again, waiting for him to do the same. And somewhere inside that image, he felt a pull. Not fear anymore, but something almost familiar, a recognition. He thought of every time he'd hidden from mirrors, every time he'd flinched from his own face. Maybe this was never about something coming out of the glass. Maybe it was about something finally wanting to come in. When dawn touched the window, the world outside turned gold. The apartment glowed softly. He looked around and realized that for the first time there was not a single reflection left intact. But still on the metal edge of the sink, in the dark water of the kettle, something glimmered. A fragment of light. A fragment of him. It blinked. Morning slipped into the apartment like a stranger. The light came in flat and colorless, erasing depth, bleaching every corner until nothing had shadows. Elias sat at the table, staring at the mug between his hands. The coffee inside was cold. He hadn't taken a sip. He was afraid that if he leaned close enough, he might see his face floating on the surface. The fragments of broken mirror he'd swept under the couch still caught the light. Tiny slivers winged from the floor like buried insects. Every time he moved, they seemed to rearrange themselves, aligning in ways that made shapes, an eye here, a mouth there. He avoided them as best he could, but there were too many. He tried to leave for work, made it as far as the front door, then stopped. The metal handle gleamed. A warped reflection curved along it, a narrow slice of his jawline and part of an eye. The eye blinked twice when he hadn't. He stepped back. The sound that came out of him was half laughter, half plea. "Enough, please." The apartment did not answer. He grabbed a towel, wrapped it around the handle, and left. Outside, the city had its own mirrors. Windows, car doors, puddles still wet from last night's rain. He kept his head down, but reflections live everywhere. He caught them, even in movement, tiny glints from passing buses, store windows flashing his silhouette back at him. Every one of them felt slightly late, as if the world were lagging behind him by a second. By the time he reached the subway, he was trembling. The train's windows stretched like black ribbons along the platform. He chose a car where the glass was fogged, sat with his eyes closed until the rhythm of the tracks became the only thing left. He could almost believe he was alone, until the glass behind him clicked. Not loudly, just a small sound, like a fingernail tapping. Then again, and again, he opened his eyes. The reflection staring back in the window was smiling faintly. Elias lifted his hand. The reflection didn't move. Then, deliberately, it raised its own hand, the wrong one. The thumb pointed the wrong direction. He jolted up, stumbled to the next carriage, heart hammering. People looked, frowned, went back to their phones. At the next stop, he got off and climbed back to the street. He never made it to work that day. When he returned home, dusk had gathered over the building like dust. The hallway light flickered, and the mirrors, those long, tall slabs that had once terrified him, looked cracked, even though they weren't. The spiderweb pattern shimmered, only when he moved, as if they were pretending to be damaged for his benefit. He walked fast, head lowered. The air smelled faintly of rain again, though everything was dry. Inside the apartment, it was quiet. Too quiet. He checked every room, every corner, his own voice whispering his name just to hear something human in the air. When he passed the bathroom, he stopped. The mirror over the sink was gone. The wall was bare, clean, as though it had never held glass. He stepped closer, touched the place where it had been. The surface felt warm. Behind him, something whispered his name. He turned and saw himself standing in the doorway. For a heartbeat, He thought it was a reflection, some leftover trick of light. But the figure was solid. The light hit it differently, the wrong way. It smiled. "Elias," it said, the voice softer, smoother, more certain than his own. "You look tired." He couldn't speak. His mouth opened. No sound came. "I've been waiting for you to stop hiding," the double continued. "Do you know how long I've had to practice? Watching you waste this face, this body?" Elias managed to whisper. "You're not real." The other stepped closer, its movements unnervingly precise. "Real enough. Get out." "I can't. We share the same walls." It lifted its hand, palm outward. The reversed thumb caught the dim light. For a second, Elias felt the same movement echo inside his own hand, like a spasm. He clenched his fists, forcing control back into his body. The double laughed quietly, still pretending you're the original. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The doorway was empty again. He stood there for a long time, breathing hard, staring at nothing. That night, sleep found him anyway. Exhaustion has no mercy. In the dream, the apartment was mirrored perfectly, every object reversed, every corridor flipped. The air shimmered with a faint pulse, like light under deep water. He was walking through it, barefoot, the floor cool and smooth beneath his feet. From somewhere ahead, a voice called his name. It was calm, coaxing. He followed it down the hall until he reached another version of his own front door. The handle was on the opposite side. He opened it and stepped through. Inside, everything gleamed. The couch, the walls, even the air had a polished clarity, as if the world here had been scrubbed of dust and imperfection. And standing in the center of that perfect space was the other him. Only now the differences were clearer. The hair shorter, neatly cut. A thin black line tattooed along the wrist, the mirror of the scar he had seen. The other turned slowly. "You see? Improvement." Elias shook his head. "You're just a dream. Dreams are the closest thing to mirrors your mind can survive." He backed away. "What do you want?" "To trade places," it said simply. "You don't like being seen. I was made for it. I'll wake up." "You already did." The floor beneath him rippled like liquid glass. He looked down, his reflection stared back from it, mouth moving out of sync. When he looked up again, the double was closer. Too close. "Stop fighting," it whispered. "You've spent your whole life hiding from yourself. Let someone braver take over." The room folded in on itself, light bending until everything turned inside out. He felt something slide through him, cold, electric, and the world went black. He woke on the floor of his real apartment. At least, he thought it was real. The morning light had changed color, faintly red gold, like blood through thin fabric. His head ached. His skin prickled. He pulled himself upright, stumbled to the bathroom, and stopped dead. The mirror had returned. His reflection looked perfect. Too perfect. The skin clearer, the eyes brighter, the shoulders straighter. He lifted a trembling hand to his face. The reflection lifted the wrong one. He whispered, "No." The reflection smiled. "You slept well." He pressed his palm against the glass. The reflection matched him, but the glass was warm under his skin. A faint vibration passed through it. Heartbeat slow, steady, not his own. "Get out," he said. The reflection's expression softened. "You already let me in." He felt it, then a faint burn on his wrist. He looked down. A thin black line had appeared there, the same mark he'd seen on the other's skin. He staggered back, staring at it. The reflection leaned closer, voice almost tender. "See? It suits you." He grabbed a towel, threw it over the mirror, backed out of the room. But even through the fabric, he could see light moving underneath, shapes shifting like something breathing beneath water. He sat on the couch, shaking. The television screen across the room flickered to life by itself. No image, just the glow. In that faint reflection, the same perfect face smiled back at him. He shut his eyes. The voice came from inside his head this time. Calm, confident. Let me handle the daylight. You can keep the dark. Elias screamed. When he opened his eyes again, the apartment was silent, the television dark. He looked down at his hands. His fingernails were shorter than he remembered, neatly trimmed. The faint chemical scent of hair dye hung in the air. He ran to the bathroom. The towel lay crumpled on the floor. In the mirror, his hair was shorter. His face clean-shaven, symmetrical, alien. He touched his cheek. The reflection didn't move. Then it blinked and whispered. Better. He hit the mirror with his fist. The surface rippled but didn't break. It felt like punching soft rubber. The reflection laughed quietly. Don't you see? We're merging. Soon you won't have to be afraid of being seen at all. Elias backed away until he hit the door. His own voice answered him from the glass, perfectly calm. I'll take care of the life you wasted. Sleep now. He felt a heaviness crawl up his spine, pulling him down. His vision blurred. The world dimmed at the edges. Before darkness claimed him, he saw one last image, his reflection raising its hand in farewell, the thumb still reversed, the smile still gentle. When the neighbors found him 2 days later, the apartment was immaculate. Every mirror spotless, every piece of broken glass gone. Elias sat on the couch, eyes open, breathing slowly, as if waiting for a cue. When they spoke to him, he answered politely, even smiled, said his name clearly, signed the papers to end his lease. No one noticed the scar on his wrist, or that when he waved goodbye, his thumb was on the wrong side. By the time Elias realized what was happening, it was already too late. His body felt lighter, slower, as though every movement was being echoed from a second too far away. He could see, he could breathe, he could think, but something about the timing of it all had gone wrong. The world had developed a delay. He'd tried to leave the apartment that morning, to find someone, anyone, but the air outside the door had looked thick, distorted, like heat rising from asphalt. He'd reached for the handle, but his hand had met invisible resistance, a surface, slick and cold, and on that surface, a faint image shivered. His other self, standing in the exact same position, hand to hand, separated by an impossible sheet of glass. The double smiled. You've always wanted to disappear, it said softly. I'm giving you that. Elias slammed his fists against the invisible wall, but the sound made no echo. The reflection didn't flinch. Instead, it raised its reversed hand, palm outward, as though offering comfort. Then it leaned forward, and the surface gave way. The world folded inward like light bending through water. For a brief second, Elias felt the two of them overlap, two sets of lungs trying to breathe in the same chest, two hearts stuttering against the same rhythm. His vision inverted. Up became down. The walls reversed themselves. He fell without falling. And then there was silence. When he opened his eyes, he was standing in his living room. But everything was wrong. The furniture was reversed, the couch on the left instead of the right, the clock's hands turning counterclockwise. Even the air felt heavier, like the room was filled with invisible fog. The light was strange, too. It didn't come from the window, but from nowhere, as if the world itself glowed faintly from beneath the surface. Hello? He whispered. His voice came back slower, echoing, warped. He turned toward the hallway. The mirrors were all there again, perfectly clean, stretching into forever. But the versions of himself inside them were moving too quickly, an army of reflections caught in fast forward. As he stepped closer, they began to slow, syncing almost perfectly with him, almost. At the far end of the hall, someone stood waiting. It was him. Or rather, the version of him that now lived on the other side. The double looked flawless, skin smooth, eyes bright, posture confident. It waved once, a gesture that felt mocking. Elias whispered, "Give it back." The reflection tilted its head. "It was never yours to keep. You wasted it." "I'm not. Look at yourself." Elias glanced down. His hands looked transparent, edges shimmering with faint light. The lines of his palms were faint, as though drawn on glass. His skin no longer caught the light properly. It absorbed it. The realization hit him like a sickness. He wasn't in his apartment. He was behind it. He pressed his hand against the mirror nearest him. The surface felt warm, alive. On the other side, his double pressed back, the movement perfectly synchronized now. The double smiled. You always ran from the mirror. You never learned what it meant to see yourself. Elias tried to speak, but no sound came. His mouth moved in silence while the other's voice echoed clearly through the glass. Don't worry, the double said. I'll make something beautiful out of us. Then it turned away. From the inside of the mirror, Elias watched his own body, his real body, move through the apartment, humming softly. The sound was gentle, confident, alien. The new Elias walked to the window, drew the curtains open, and let the sunlight spill in. It touched everything in gold. Elias felt nothing. The light didn't reach him. He pounded on the glass, screaming soundlessly. The other didn't react. Days passed, or what felt like days. Time didn't behave properly inside the glass. Sometimes the world outside froze. Sometimes it sped up until whole hours passed in a blink. The new Elias began changing things, moving furniture, repainting walls, throwing out clothes. He even smiled when neighbors visited, laughing easily, a sound the real Elias hadn't made in years. And every time he smiled, he passed by a mirror and glanced into it, just long enough to whisper something Elias couldn't hear. Each time, the reflection felt weaker, fainter. Elias began to fade. He found that if he stood still long enough, his hands became translucent, as though his body were dissolving into the glass. The space around him wasn't empty, it shimmered faintly, filled with faint figures flickering in and out, shadows of other faces, other movements, trapped in their own panels of glass. He wasn't the first. He pressed his palm against the wall. Can you hear me? He whispered to the nearest shadow. A voice answered, faint, like wind across metal. You learned to stop asking. He turned toward the sound. A woman's face flickered into focus on the far side of the wall. Half real, half light. Her eyes looked hollow. Who are you? Elias asked. Doesn't matter, she said. They take the ones who look too long. Them? The ones on your side. The ones that shine. Her voice trembled. The longer you watch, the thinner the glass gets, until it breaks. And then, her image stuttered, glitched, and vanished. Elias backed away, heart pounding, though he wasn't sure he still had one. He turned back toward his apartment. The new Elias was shaving, humming to himself in front of the bathroom mirror. Elias pressed both hands to the inside of the glass. Please, he mouthed. Let me out. The other looked up. For a second, their eyes met. Then the new Elias reached forward and touched the mirror's surface. The contact sent a ripple through the glass that burned Elias's palms. I can feel you, the double said, still trying to ruin things. Elias tried to speak, but the mirror swallowed his words. The new one smiled. You'll thank me. Eventually, he finished shaving, wiped the mirror clean, and left the bathroom. Elias stood alone in the dark reflection. He began testing the limits of his prison. When the light outside dimmed, he could move more freely. He found he could slip between panes of glass through the corridor of mirrors, across reflections of furniture, even into the shine of the window. But every time he crossed, the world warped. The geometry of it twisted in impossible ways, corridors folding into themselves, reflections leading to rooms that didn't exist. Once, he stepped through a mirror that should have led to the kitchen and found himself inside a copy of the hallway. Only this one stretched forever. Mirrors, facing mirrors in endless recursion. Each reflection inside that corridor looked more decayed than the last, like photocopies losing detail. He ran until the horizon bent and the glass beneath his feet cracked, and suddenly he was back in the apartment again, pressed against the living room window, watching the new Elias laughing with someone outside. A woman smiling, bright, her hand resting on his arm. Elias felt something inside him twist. No, he whispered. The woman leaned close, laughing at something he said. Her reflection in the window turned toward Elias, meeting his eyes directly through the glass. She froze. Her laughter stopped. She looked back at the man beside her, at Elias's body, and frowned, as though noticing something wrong. The new Elias followed her gaze. Their eyes met in the window pane. For the first time, the perfect smile faltered. Elias pressed closer to the glass, desperate. The reflection on his side began to blur. He could feel the boundary softening again, the way it had that first time. He reached out. So did the woman. The new Elias slammed the blinds down, cutting off the light. The connection vanished. After that day, he began covering the mirrors again. From inside, Elias watched him move through the apartment, draping sheets, pulling curtains, avoiding every reflection. The reversal was almost funny. The confident one afraid now. Elias pressed his hand to the glass and whispered, "You see how it feels?" For the first time, the new Elias looked directly into the mirror and answered, "I do. That's why I'll make sure no one else ever does." He lifted a hammer. Elias screamed, pounding on the inside, but the sound never carried. The first mirror shattered. Elias felt it like pain splintering light through his body, shards of himself breaking apart. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his chest as cracks spread through the air. The new Elias smashed another mirror, then another. Each blow dimmed the space inside the glass, erasing the corridors, the other trapped faces. The mirrored world was collapsing, folding into darkness. Elias crawled toward the last pane left, unbroken, the bathroom mirror. Through it, he saw the double standing over him, breathing hard, eyes wild. The hammer lifted one final time. "Goodbye," said the reflection. The blow never landed. The hammer froze midair. Trembling, the new Elias gasped, eyes widening. He dropped it, clutching his wrist. The scar, the black line, had begun to bleed. He fell to his knees, staring at it, horrified. Inside the glass, Elias felt something shift. The balance tipping. He pressed both hands against the mirror, pushing harder than before. The surface rippled. On the other side, the new Elias tried to back away, but the air had grown thick. He stumbled, grabbed at the sink, and stared into the mirror just as Elias's hand broke through. The contact was electric. For one impossible instant, their faces overlapped again, one screaming, one silent, and the world inverted. The mirror cracked down the middle. Light burst out like breath escaping, then quiet. When the landlord entered the apartment weeks later, it was empty. The walls were clean, the mirrors unbroken. He found a note on the counter. Only one sentence written in small, neat handwriting. "I finally see myself clearly." No one ever rented the apartment again. Tenants complained that the hallway made them dizzy, that the mirrors whispered their names. At night, passing neighbors swore they saw two silhouettes behind the glass, one moving freely, one trapped, forever pressing from the other side. And if you walk down that hallway very late, when the lights flicker just before dawn, you can still hear the faint tapping from inside the mirrors, like someone trying to finish a sentence they never got to say. The building changed hands again. New investors, new advertisements, the same address. They painted the hall, replaced the lights, and told future tenants the mirrors were heritage fixtures. A design choice from the 60s, preserved for charm. They didn't know, or maybe they did, and didn't care. People get used to living beside ghosts when the rent is cheap enough. For a few weeks, nothing happened. The tenants were young students, mostly too busy staring into the blue light of their phones to notice the faint shimmer that clung to the walls when the power flickered. But one by one, small things began to go wrong. A woman on the second floor said her reflection had a bruise she didn't have. A man from 3C complained that when he brushed his teeth, his reflection moved before he did. Another tenant, one who lived alone, reported hearing footsteps following her own in the hallway at night, perfectly matched but half a beat delayed. They all laughed about it at first. The building was old. Mirrors warp, floors creak. Everyone knows how light tricks the tired eye. Then, one evening, the hallway lights began to hum. The hum was low, almost musical, like the pitch of a tuning fork pressed against the spine. The mirrors trembled faintly. Every reflection within them turned its head at the same time, toward the far end of the corridor where no one stood. And from that point forward, nothing in the building stayed perfectly still. Elise, the property manager, came to check the complaints herself. She walked the corridor with a clipboard and a smile that was a little too tight, reassuring tenants as she went. She paused by one of the larger mirrors halfway down the hall, adjusted her reflection's collar, and noticed something odd. Her reflection's left hand wasn't holding the clipboard. She frowned, raised her own hand. The reflection matched her, but the clipboard was gone. She leaned closer. The glass looked deeper than before, the light bending into it like water. Her reflection blinked. And then, for just a heartbeat, it smiled a slow, knowing curl of the mouth that Elise didn't make. She stumbled back, clipboard hitting the floor. The lights above flickered once, twice, and steadied. The mirror showed only her again. Perfectly ordinary, perfectly synchronized. She told herself she'd imagined it. But when she turned away, her reflection stayed where it was, still staring after her. By the end of the week, the hallway felt different. The air carried a static charge that lifted the fine hairs on people's arms. Residents whispered that the mirrors were multiplying. One day there were 12, the next 13, the next 15. None of them could agree which wall had gained the new panels, but everyone felt the hall growing longer. Some said it now took twice as many steps to reach the elevator. Maintenance crews refused to come after dark. Tools went missing. The cleaning woman quit after hearing a voice behind her whisper, "He missed a spot." Though she had been alone, the landlord dismissed it all as hysteria until the night he came himself. He entered the building just after midnight, flashlight in hand, and walked down the corridor, tapping the walls as he went. Each mirror gave back a faint metallic thud, hollow and patient. At the far end, the last mirror looked darker than the rest. He lifted the flashlight toward it. The beam faded, as though the glass swallowed it whole. Inside the reflection, the hallway appeared the same. Same walls, same light, but filled with people. Dozens of them, standing shoulder to shoulder, staring out. Their faces were pale, blurred, rippling faintly as if submerged in water. The landlord stepped closer. One of the faces stepped forward too. He barely had time to draw breath before the glass quivered. The light flicked out. When it returned, the hallway was empty. His flashlight lay on the floor, beam pointing at the ceiling. The mirrors gleamed, and among the infinite reflections, a new figure stood matching him perfectly, except for the faint smudge of a reversed thumb. After that night, the building began to change faster. Light fixtures failed in synchronized patterns, whole floors going dark for hours. The tenants left one by one, unable to sleep through the whispering that came through the vents. Those who stayed began to avoid the hall entirely, creeping along the stairwells instead. And yet, no matter where they walked, they could feel the mirrors watching. It was subtle at first, the sensation of being seen from behind glass. But soon, it became more invasive. The mirrors reflected rooms that no longer existed, furniture rearranged, faces that looked almost but not quite their own. The walls started to pulse with warmth. Some said you could hear breathing in the plaster, slow and steady, as if the building itself had lungs. They didn't know it yet, but the hallway had become aware. The thousands of reflections, the fragments of Elias and his double, had fused. The mirrored consciousness stretched along the walls, remembering every face that passed, every gesture, every moment of attention. It fed on observation. Every glance, every mirror check, every idle look added another layer to the thing that lived inside. The hall of reflection had learned how to see. Months later, the building stood mostly empty. Only the lights in the hall remained on, burning soft and white through the night. A city inspector arrived to finalize the condemnation notice. He was efficient, tired, eager to go home. He walked down the hallway with a clipboard in hand, muttering to himself about faulty wiring and outdated code. When he reached the last mirror, he noticed his reflection was smiling. He wasn't. He leaned closer. His reflection raised its hand. He didn't. The surface of the glass rippled outward, catching his face and pulling it thin, distorting his eyes into a smear of light. He dropped the clipboard, The mirror bulged, then flattened. The hallway went quiet again. Later, when the paperwork arrived at the city office, it bore his signature. Perfectly neat, perfectly mirrored. They say the building still stands, though it isn't on any map. At night, its hallway glows faintly through the windows, even when no electricity runs to it. Sometimes, pedestrians passing on the street below claim to see light flicker deep inside 1,000 reflections moving like one organism. A slow shimmer of faces turning in unison to watch. When the wind passes, the sound it makes through the cracks in the facade almost resembles a voice. Look, those who do never describe what they see. A few leave the city altogether, unable to bear the sight of glass. Others stay but begin to act strangely. They move with a mirror's rhythm, half a beat late, gestures reversed. They grow quiet, polite, perfectly symmetrical, and when they catch their own reflections in shop windows or dark puddles, they smile without meaning to. The contagion is an illness. It's imitation, the kind that spreads faster than thought. Each time someone looks too long, the hallway looks back, memorizing. The glass remembers their face, folds it into its endless corridor. There's no sound when it happens, only the faintest shiver in the air, like a breath drawn from both sides of the mirror at once. Somewhere deep within that living maze of glass, Elias still watches. Or something that used to be Elias. He walks endlessly, pressing his palms against the inside of each mirror, searching for the one that leads out. But each reflection he passes whispers the same thing in his voice. We're already outside. The corridor hums gently, the sound of thought multiplied. Light runs along its length like blood through veins. The mirrors breathe together now, exhaling fog that tastes like silver. And if you ever stand before one of them, any mirror, anywhere, and see for just a second, your reflection lag behind, don't wait to see it catch up. Because that pause, that single hesitation, is how the hallway finds you. It doesn't need walls anymore, only the act of looking, the nursery shift. The job came with silence. That was what Dave liked about it. He'd spent half his life working the kinds of shifts where silence was the only thing you could count on. Docks, warehouses, construction sites after midnight. He'd learned that silence isn't empty. It's full of things that don't need permission to breathe. The new contract was better than most. $22 an hour, health coverage, air-conditioned building, a high-rise that gleamed by day and turned to glass and shadow at night. The company brochure called it the Clearwater Executive Tower. The guards just called it the Glass Cage. Dave had been hired to cover the night shift 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., patrolling the lower floors and the basement garages. Basement was a polite word. The space went down 5 levels, deeper than it needed to. The top 3 were for staff parking. The 4th held the maintenance tunnels, and the 5th, well, that one wasn't on the new floor plan. When the site manager handed him the keys, he'd said it like a joke. Don't worry about B5. That one's been sealed since the renovation. David laughed, the way you laugh when you're being tested. Sealed? Storage. Old files. Nothing important. Yeah, but later, when he asked one of the janitors about it, the man had just looked up from his mop and said quietly, "Used to be a nursery." Dave thought he'd misheard. A what? A daycare, the man said. Back when this place was a government building, a long time ago, before they sold it to Clearwater. Why would they build a daycare 5 floors underground? The janitor shrugged. Safer, they said. No street access, no traffic, no strangers walking by. Then one day they just closed it. Packed up, locked the doors, said it was a health code thing. He didn't elaborate, and Dave didn't ask again. His first night on shift, the building was already asleep. The offices above glowed faintly through frosted glass partitions, screensavers drifting like small galaxies. The air smelled faintly of new carpet and dust. He checked his radio, his flashlight, his clock, 9:58 p.m. The security booth at the lobby level had 2 monitors, one showing the entrance, the other split between camera feeds of the lower levels. Most of them were static, dark screens that flickered when the system looped. He watched them for a while, sipping coffee from a paper cup. At exactly 10:02, the elevator pinged softly, signaling it had reached the lobby. The door slid open, revealing nothing but his own reflection in the mirrored interior. He'd been told to take the service elevator instead of the main one, but he didn't mind. The mirrored walls made him feel less alone. He stepped inside, pressed the button marked B1. The lights overhead buzzed faintly as the car began its slow descent. The floor slid by in silence. B1, B2, B3. The digital numbers blinked red, steady, almost hypnotic. When it reached B4, the elevator slowed. The doors opened with a groan that sounded too human. The hallways stretched out ahead concrete, pale green lighting, the smell of detergent and old machinery. Pipes ran along the ceiling like veins. He walked his route. Maintenance office, generator room, water systems, everything in order. He checked each lock, marked it on his clipboard, made notes in tidy printed handwriting. When he came back to the elevator, he saw the digital display flicker. B5. The button for that floor was dark. No light ring around it, no label beside it. But the display had changed on its own, glowing faintly with the forbidden number. He frowned and pressed the up button. Nothing happened. He pressed again. The door slid closed, and the car began to move downward. Not funny, he muttered. He hit lobby, then emergency stop. Neither responded. The car kept descending. The hum of the machinery grew louder, then softer, like breathing. When it finally stopped, the display above the doors read B5. He hesitated, hand hovering over the panel. Then the doors opened. At first, it looked like any other basement-level bare concrete, exposed wires, the smell of old insulation. But the air was different, warmer, sweeter. A faint, artificial scent drifted from the dark powder and milk, the kind used in baby lotion. It hit him in a wave of recognition so sudden it made his stomach tighten. He stepped forward. His flashlight beam caught the shapes of old cubbies built into the wall rows of small wooden compartments, most empty, some still holding toys covered in dust. The walls were painted a color that might once have been cheerful. Yellow faded to gray. He walked slowly, light tracing over murals of half-erased animals. Elephants, rabbits, smiling suns. Then came the sound, soft at first, a creak, slow and rhythmic, like wood swaying on metal hinges. He froze. It came again. Creak. Pause. Creak. The flashlight beam trembled slightly in his hand. Ahead, beyond the edge of light, something shifted. He took a step closer. There, half hidden in shadow, stood a row of wooden cribs. Old, splintered, some missing bars. He moved the light slowly along them. Inside the first crib was nothing but dust. The second held a small plastic rattle. The third a faded blanket, edges frayed. When the beam reached the fourth crib, something swayed gently. A mobile hung from a bent metal arm, tiny paper stars spinning soundlessly in the stale air. And then, faintly, he heard it. A voice, not a whisper, not a cry, just a low hum. A lullaby, without words, repeating on the same two notes. It came from nowhere and everywhere, filling the room in slow, circular motion. He stepped back toward the elevator. Nope, he muttered, forcing a laugh. Not part of the job. But when he reached the corner, his radio crackled to life. A burst of static. Then, faintly, a child's laugh. The sound was so out of place, it felt obscene. He turned the volume down, heartbeat pounding in his ears. The elevator door stood open behind him, the interior light spilling across the floor like a path back to reason. He stepped inside and pressed lobby. The doors closed. The car began to rise. But just before they sealed completely, he saw something move in the reflection of the mirrored wall, small fingers pressed against the edge of the frame, gripping from the outside. He told himself it was a trick of light, an after image of the cribs. He didn't sleep when he got home. He left every light on. The next night, when he clocked in, the supervisor asked if everything had gone smoothly. Dave said yes. He didn't mention the extra floor. He didn't mention the sound of the lullaby that had followed him up the elevator shaft like a smell. By the third night, he had almost convinced himself it had been nerves. New job, new building, too much caffeine. Until 3 a.m., when the lobby intercom crackled. It was an old system, patched into every floor speaker line. Normally, only the control room used it to buzz deliveries or announce maintenance calls. The static hissed, then cleared, and for a second he thought he heard breathing. Then a faint voice, high and toneless, began to hum, the same two notes, over and over. He stared at the intercom speaker, frozen. The hum stopped. Then a small voice whispered, almost shy, "Playtime's over." The line went dead. The elevator pinged. When the doors opened, the display read, B5. The next evening, Dave arrived early. He told himself it was because he wanted to get used to the building's layout. But the truth was simpler. He didn't want to be late. Not tonight, not after what had happened. There was something about walking into an empty lobby after midnight that made him feel like the last person alive on Earth. The tower's glass walls turned black after sunset. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead with an anxious rhythm. Every sound carried a creak of leather from his boots, the sigh of air conditioning vents. He ran through the usual checklist on the clipboard. The same routes, the same flickering cameras. Everything normal. Everything pretending to be normal. But the elevator was waiting for him again. Its digital panel glowed softly, frozen at B5, though he hadn't touched the buttons. He stared at it for a long time, the way you stare at an animal you don't quite trust, waiting to see if it will move. He could have called it in, told his supervisor the system was glitching. But then what would he say when they asked why he'd checked that floor? What would he write in the report? Instead, he told himself a lie that was easy to believe. Curiosity was part of the job. He stepped in, pressed the close button, and the door sealed him in. The hum of the elevator sounded deeper tonight, almost wet. The descent took longer than before, as though the air between floors had thickened. When the doors opened, he expected the smell, the powder, the faint sweetness. But this time, the air carried something else. Salt. It stung his nose, sharp and metallic, the smell of tears and rust. The hallway stretched out before him, exactly as before. The yellow-gray paint, the fading murals, the line of tiny cubbies. But now, the light wasn't his flashlight, it came from overhead. Faint bulbs flickering awake one by one, reacting to his presence. He walked slowly, boots echoing on the concrete. Each step forward made another light flicker on, as if the building itself was waking with him. At the far end of the corridor, he saw the same door. Metal, dented, bolted shut with a rusted padlock. The one he hadn't dared to open last time. Now it was open, just a crack, wide enough to breathe through. The air inside the room was thick, still. The beam of his flashlight drifted across the floor dust. Scattered toys, a toppled shelf, a plastic ring stack lay overturned beside a row of tiny wooden chairs. And then he saw the book. It sat on the edge of a small table, its cover cracked with age, the pages bloated by moisture. A record ledger, names written in long, looping script. He brushed the dust away. Children's attendance. Room psych. Each line carried a date, a name, a check mark. Some of the entries ended abruptly, the ink smeared, as if someone had been interrupted mid-word. The last date was more than 20 years ago, and below it, written in darker ink, in a smaller hand, unclaimed. He turned the page and stopped breathing. There were no more names, only lines. 50 of them. Blank. His light flickered. Somewhere behind him, something moved, a sound like cloth shifting. Then another. He turned, flashlight sweeping across the room. The light caught on something pale, an outline low to the floor, a crib, then another beside it. He remembered counting 4 last time. Now there were dozens, stretching into the darkness, lined up like pews in a church. Each one swayed, just slightly, as if rocked by invisible hands. The creak of old wood filled the air. Synchronized, slow, he backed toward the door. That's when the crying started. It wasn't a wail, it wasn't a scream, it was soft, almost delicate, the sound of children trying not to be heard. The kind of crying that happens after a long time being told to stop. He froze. The sound rose, growing fuller, layered, until it filled the room with overlapping voices. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Each one different, each one trembling with something deeper than pain. He pressed a hand to his radio. Dispatch. This is Tower Security. Basement 5. Static. He turned the dial. Hello? Control? Only static. Then, beneath it, a voice, a child's whisper, close enough to be in his ear. Don't tell. He dropped the radio. The crying shifted, becoming rhythmic, organized like breathing, like a choir exhaling grief. He stumbled back into the hall, flashlight trembling in his hand, but the sound followed him. Every light above began to flicker, one by one, as if reacting to the sobs. The hallway seemed to breathe in time with them. He reached the elevator, slammed the up button. The doors didn't move. Behind him, the crying stopped. Complete silence. The kind that makes the inside of your head ring. Then the intercom crackled. Not the radio, the overhead speaker. A hiss, and then a voice, small, uncertain, speaking through layers of static. Chú ơi. Dave froze. Chú ơi. Mẹ cháu nói. Chú sẽ là người trông cháu. He felt every hair on his arms lift. The voice was calm, innocent, too innocent. He whispered to himself, not real. But the elevator lights flared, once then died. The whole floor went black, and in the dark, he could hear them moving, not running, not walking, crawling, tiny hands brushing against the floor, tiny breaths, uneven, growing closer. He lifted the flashlight, swished it on nothing. Dead. He backed into the corner, pulse hammering. A sound brushed his ear, a whisper barely louder than breathing. It's your turn. He bolted. He didn't know which direction. The hallway stretched endlessly, repeating itself, cradles, cubbies, murals flashing past. He tripped, caught himself, kept running until his lungs burned. When he finally stopped, gasping, he realized he'd run in a circle. The door to the record room stood open again. Inside, the crying had stopped completely. The silence pressed against his chest, like a hand. He took one hesitant step forward, driven by something between terror and duty. The air changed. Cooler now. Stale. The flashlight flickered back to life for a single second. He saw the cribs again empty, all except one. At the far end of the room, something moved beneath a blanket. Small, rhythmic, breathing. He wanted to run. Every nerve in his body screamed for him to. But his feet carried him forward, one slow step at a time. When he reached the crib, he lifted the blanket. There was no child, only a doll. Its porcelain face cracked down the middle, mouth frozen open as if caught mid-cry. He let out a shaky laugh that wasn't really laughter. Jesus. Someone's idea of a joke. Then, the doll's eyes opened. Glass eyes reflecting the light. Blank but focused. Its lips parted wider. The voice that came out wasn't mechanical, it was layered, human, dozens of tones at once. Chúng ta vẫn đang chờ. He dropped it. The sound it made when it hit the floor wasn't the thud of porcelain, it was soft, wet. He staggered back, nearly tripping over the other cribs. The air was vibrating now, humming with energy. Above him, the ceiling lights pulsed. One by one, they burst. The glass rained down in silence. And in that darkness, 100 voices whispered together. Stay. He ran. He didn't look back until the elevator doors closed around him. When they did, he saw small handprints smeared on the inside of the door, prints too small to belong to anyone alive. He didn't remember leaving the building. Only the sound of his boots hitting pavement, the night air rushing against his face, the faint echo of a lullaby following him up the street. When he reached his truck, he locked the doors, turned the radio up loud, but the station wouldn't play, only static. Then, faintly, through the static, a familiar tune began to emerge, the same two-note lullaby. He punched the dial off, sat there shaking until dawn. The next morning he quit. No notice, no explanation, just turned in his keys and walked out. But that night, lying in bed, he woke at 3 a.m. to a sound he hadn't heard since the basement, a soft creak, then the rhythm of wood swaying. He turned on the bedside lamp. In the corner of his room, the shadows were moving, shaped like the bars of a crib. The lullaby started again, soft and unhurried. And from somewhere inside that quiet melody came a voice, clear as daylight, whispering his name. Dave told himself he wasn't going back. He said it out loud 3 times, like a prayer, like an oath. He'd quit, turned in the uniform, handed over the keys. He'd driven north until the city was just a glow behind him, but the sound followed. The lullaby had become background noise in his skull, soft, persistent, circular. He'd wake to it and find nothing playing. He'd turn on the faucet and swear the water hummed to its rhythm. Even the wind seemed to breathe in time with that slow, awful melody. On the 4th night, he dreamed of the elevator again. It opened to the basement, but the air wasn't stale anymore. It smelled like sugar and chalk. Light leaked from the doorway, gold and warm. Inside, the cribs were full this time, each rocking gently. Little hands waved in the glow. When he woke, he was sitting upright in bed, car keys in hand. The Clearwater Tower stood empty now, its lobby hollow, glass walls dusted with grime. The company had gone remote. The guard booth still stood, the monitors still on standby, looping static from cameras that no longer fed anywhere. He told himself he was there to find proof, to take photos, to show someone that what he'd seen wasn't just the aftermath of too many night shifts. He parked behind the service dock. The elevator was dark, its panel dead. He took the stairs instead, flashlight beam bouncing off concrete. At B3, the air turned damp. At B4, the smell returned the faint sweetness of baby powder and old wood. And when he reached the final flight, he didn't hesitate. The door to B5 was gone. Only an open space remained, breathing faint warmth. The lights came on as he stepped inside, flickering one by one down the long hallway. The murals were clearer now, the animals newly painted, the colors bright and wet. The cubbies gleamed as though freshly scrubbed. The air was full of the faint sound of laughter. He moved slowly, pulse pounding. The cribs were back, aligned in perfect symmetry. Toys rested neatly inside blocks, rattles, a stuffed bear with one button eye. At the far end, the record ledger still waited on the table. But it wasn't the same book. This one was open, pages crisp and white, ink fresh. He stepped closer. At the top of the page, new entrance, unclaimed. And beneath it, the first line, written in neat, childish scrawl. David Harlan, 42 months. Checked in. He froze. The next line read, status, awaiting guardian. His own name, his handwriting. He turned the page. It was blank at first. Then the ink began to bloom across it, curling up from the fibers like smoke. Names appeared, one after another, all written in the same shaky hand. Marcus, Ellen, Toby, Clea. Every name had the same word beside it. Unclaimed. He whispered, "What is this?" The air shivered. A faint sound rose behind him, the slow, deliberate creak of wood swaying. He turned. The cribs were rocking again. Every one of them. He stepped back, light trembling in his hand. Inside the nearest crib, something moved beneath the blanket, small and restless. He reached for it before his mind could stop him. The blanket fell away. The crib was empty, but beneath it, carved into the wood, were words scratched deep and rough, letters uneven. We waited. He backed away, throat tight. The air in the room was shifting, thickening, the sweetness turning sour. Then, from somewhere deep within the line of cribs, came the sound of breathing too many lungs for the space. He whispered into the dark, "What happened here? A voice answered, not a child this time, but a woman's, soft and dry, like paper tearing. They left us. Who? Them. The ones who built this place. The ones who said we'd be safe. He turned toward the voice. A shadow stood by the far wall, a woman's outline in an old uniform, the kind worn by daycare staff decades ago. Her posture was wrong, shoulders stiff, hands clasped too tight. She stepped forward, and the air temperature dropped. Dave's breath fogged. They left us locked down here when the sirens went off, she said. We waited for the all clear. The power went out. The air vents closed. The lights never came back. Her voice trembled between anger and resignation. They never came back. The lullaby began again soft, rising from the cribs, as if sung by 100 voices too weak to speak. The woman's head tilted. Do you hear them? He nodded slowly, throat dry. Yes, they were supposed to be picked up that day. The evacuation order came too soon. The staff fled. The generators failed. They couldn't open the doors without power. She turned, gaze fixed on the cribs. They cried until the air went thin. Dave felt the words settle into him like weight. You stayed? Her lips twisted into something almost like a smile. Someone had to keep count. Hen? She pointed toward the ledger. He looked down. The ink on the open page was still moving. His name began to fade, the letters dissolving, replaced by another. Guardian, confirmed. He shook his head. No. The cribs began to creak again, faster this time, wood knocking against metal in uneven rhythm. He stumbled back. I'm not your... The woman's face split in a way that wasn't natural. Her smile widened too far. You came back. That's all it takes. The lights above them burst in sequence, pop, 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 casting the room in pulsing shadow. Every crib was now full, tiny shapes under the blankets, tiny hands pressed against the bars. The lullaby deepened, louder now, words forming in the melody. Sleep, little one. The dark will keep you. Hush, little one. We'll never leave you. Dave covered his ears, backing toward the door, but the sound grew inside his head instead. The woman reached for him, her shadow stretching across the floor like liquid. They needed someone to remember their names, she said softly. You wrote them down. That makes you theirs. He turned and ran. The hallway tilted beneath him, the murals bleeding color, the cubbies closing like mouths. The elevator doors glowed ahead, a square of cold light. He slammed the button. The car opened instantly, as though waiting. Inside, the mirrored walls reflected not him, but a dozen versions of the woman standing behind him. He stepped in anyway. The doors closed. The descent began not up, not down, but sideways somehow, the numbers on the panel flickering through symbols that weren't numbers at all. He pressed himself into the corner, whispering, Please, just take me out. The elevator stopped. The doors opened. He was standing in the lobby again, only it wasn't the lobby. The light was pale, filtered, underwater. The security booth stood empty. The glass windows showed no city beyond them, only darkness. On the floor, hundreds of small footprints led from the elevator to the far wall, where a single door waited painted yellow, with stickers of cartoon animals peeling off. Above it, a sign, Nursery. Open. The lullaby came again, soft, inviting, and under it, a new sound, the crackle of his own radio, though it had been dead since the night he quit. A voice whispered through the static, small and familiar. Joy. Mẹ cháu nói chú sẽ là người trông cháu. He stood there for a long moment, every muscle locked, the weight of the air pressing against his chest. Then he took one step forward, and another. The door creaked open before he touched it. Warm light spilled out, soft and golden. For a moment, he could see them, tiny shapes on the floor, toys scattered around, the air full of dust that shimmered like morning Sunday. A small hand reached out from the light, pale and perfect. He hesitated only once. Then he reached back. Outside, the building remained quiet. Weeks later, when the new security contractor came to inventory the site, they found the ledger still open on the basement table. The first name had been crossed out. Beneath it, written in the same looping script, was another, Supervisor D. Harlan, and beneath that, a note written in smaller, fainter handwriting, all accounted for. The pages fluttered once, though there was no wind. They switched the power back on 2 months after the Clearwater Tower was officially decommissioned. The city needed the grid for new construction, and the maintenance teams didn't believe in curses. They believed in schedules. The moment the current flowed back into the building, every light on the first floor came to life at once. The monitors in the empty security booth flickered awake, showing blank screens that should have been dead feeds. For exactly 12 seconds, all of them displayed the same thing: a nursery painted yellow, rows of small beds, and a man sitting at a table with his head bowed. Then the image vanished. The people who worked in the surrounding offices noticed first. A faint hum in the air around 3 a.m., like a transmission struggling to find its channel. Some thought it was an electrical fault. Others said it sounded like a voice. A week later, the hum began to carry words. It came through car radios parked near the tower, through cell phones left charging overnight, through the static between television channels. Always the same gentle tone, a child's voice reciting names. Marcus, Ellen, Toby, Claire. Over and over, each name followed by a long pause, then the sound of pages turning. The city's maintenance division sent a technician named Laura to inspect the building's old PA system. She arrived at noon, clipboard under one arm, skeptical grin ready. The security entrance had been chained shut since the incident, but the padlock hung open, as if someone had been expecting her. Inside, the air smelled of ozone and something faintly sweet. She clicked her pen, making notes. Lobby power restored. Cameras operational. Her radio crackled. She ignored it. The elevator doors were propped open, wires dangling from the ceiling like veins. She took the service stairs instead. The hum grew louder as she descended, steady, rhythmic, somewhere between white noise and breathing. By the time she reached B4, her hands had begun to shake. At the landing, the wall speaker, an old metal disc the size of a plate, was glowing faintly from within. Laura lifted her phone to record it. Electrical interference, she muttered. Then the glow pulsed once, and a voice came through. Hello, Dave. She froze. Her name wasn't Dave. She looked up at the speaker, heart pounding. Who's there? Silence. Then the faint rustle of pages again, followed by the sound of a chair moving across the floor. A man's voice this time. Tired, gentle. They're all here now. The sound made her stomach twist. She knew that voice. It had been in the incident report, the last recorded message from the previous security guard, Dave Harlan. The city sealed the tower again the next day, but the broadcast didn't stop. Every night, precisely at 3 a.m., the hum began anew, spreading farther through the air. People living miles away started hearing it. Taxi radios, police scanners, even baby monitors picked up the signal. Sleep, little one. The dark will keep you. The voice had multiplied. Children now sang in perfect unison, the melody looping endlessly. For some, it was background noise. For others, it crawled under the skin. A lullaby that left their houses colder, their mirrors fogged. Their clocks stopped at 3 a.m. A journalist named Tomas Reyes was the first to sneak back inside after the second lockdown. He carried a camera, a flashlight, and a live broadcast feed for his podcast, Urban Hauntings. He started the stream in the lobby. The chat flooded instantly with viewers urging him to go deeper. At B1, he found nothing. At B2, his camera began to pick up flickers of motion behind him, shapes too low to be adults. At B3, he started to hear the creaking. He reached B4 and stopped to catch his breath. The hallway stretched in both directions, lights dim but functional. Okay, he said into the mic, voice steady but thin. If you're hearing this, I'm the first person down here in over a year. The report said there used to be. A sound interrupted him. A child laughing. Not ahead. Not behind. Through the walls, he swallowed hard. There's movement in the air vents. He aimed the camera toward the nearest speaker grill. If anyone's in here, I can help. You don't have to hide. Hell, a voice replied immediately, soft and close. We're not hiding. He turned the camera toward the sound and saw the hallway on his screen change. The real corridor remained gray and lifeless, but the one on his monitor bloomed in color. Bright murals, yellow walls, a table set with toys, and at the far end, someone sat with their back to the lens. A man in a gray uniform. Dave? Tomas whispered. The man lifted his head. The children's song filled the corridor again, louder this time, vibrating the metal vents. Hush, little one, we'll never leave you. The man turned. His eyes were hollow, pupils reflecting static. His lips moved in sync with the children's voices. Don't interrupt nap time. The feed cut out. The video went viral before morning. People froze the final frame, analyzing the man's uniform, the shape of the room, the faint outlines of children behind him. Some said it was doctored. Others swore they recognized one of the faces pressed against the glass of a crib. The tower became a pilgrimage site for the curious. Visitors gathered outside the chain-link fence, phones held high, trying to catch the broadcast. They claimed you could feel the air vibrating like the entire building was breathing. On nights when the wind was right, the lullaby drifted across the city. Parents began reporting strange behavior in their children. Night terrors, sleepwalking, drawings of yellow rooms filled with floating shapes. Some claimed their kids started repeating the names from the broadcast, over and over, as if taking attendance. The city issued a statement blaming residual electromagnetic interference. But the noise didn't fade. It only spread. By mid-autumn, every loudspeaker in the surrounding district carried the signal. Even broken ones. Maintenance crews ripped them out. The next night, they returned wires sprouting like vines, metal faces gleaming in the dark. A pattern began to form. The closer someone came to the building, the more their reflection in any surface seemed to distort. Faces elongated, eyes wide, skin pale as paper. Some of them smiled when they weren't supposed to. A new rumor spread: if you stood by the fence long enough, you'd hear your name added to the broadcast. Inside the tower, no one could confirm what had become of Dave. The official report described his disappearance as unresolved, presumed psychological break. But one security contractor, an old man who'd worked there before the renovation, said he'd seen something on the lobby monitors weeks after the last lockdown. A feed that shouldn't have existed, camera 12, marked basement 5. The image had shown a nursery again, cleaner than before, lit by soft gold light. Children sat cross-legged on the floor, facing a figure who stood in the center, holding a ledger. The man's voice was calm. Today, we remember those who were unclaimed, but no one is unclaimed forever. He turned a page. The children echoed softly. No one is unclaimed. Then he looked directly into the camera. You're listening, aren't you? The feed cut to static. By the end of the year, the city had stopped sending crews. The tower was sealed for good, the entrance buried under fresh concrete. Still, the signal went on. At exactly 3 a.m., across the country now, every frequency caught it. The hum, the pages turning, the small voice reading names. Some nights, listeners swore they heard new names added, their own. In a suburban home hundreds of miles away, a baby monitor crackled softly. A young mother stirred awake, half asleep, thinking her child was crying. She leaned close, listening, but it wasn't crying. It was a man's voice, low and gentle, reading from a book. Eleanor Brooks, 6 months, checked in, guardian, D. Harlan. The woman froze. The air from the speaker grew warmer. Then, faintly, the melody began. Sleep, little one. The dark will keep you. The woman turned off the monitor. The lullaby continued anyway. When she opened the nursery door, the room was empty. Only the crib remained, swaying softly in the dark. Outside, under the concrete that sealed Clearwater Tower, the lights of B5 glowed once more. The cribs were full again. The walls whispered with the hum of 100 voices, some small, some grown, all repeating the same phrase in perfect rhythm, all accounted for. And somewhere, at a desk under a yellow lamp, Dave Harlan turned another page in the ledger. His voice carried through every speaker, every wire, every forgotten frequency that had ever known a lullaby. Next name, he smiled faintly, pen hovering above the page, unclaimed no more. And they started calling it the Night Chorus. At first, it was just an internet legend, something whispered about on late-night forums threads titled, "Has anyone else heard the children?" But the recordings were real, the frequency was real, and the song, once heard, didn't leave. It always began at the same time, 3 a.m. sharp. No matter the country, no matter the time zone, one station, just one, would interrupt its regular broadcast with the sound of static, followed by a faint hum. Then the voices of children would rise through the noise, soft and layered. The melody had no clear language, no instruments, no rhythm that made sense. It was made of breathing and humming and the occasional turn of a page. And at the center, a man's voice, warm, careful, patient, reading names aloud. Maya, Lucas, Finn, Claire, Dave Harlan. No one knew where the signal came from. Radio engineers called it an orphan frequency, a dead band, between channels that shouldn't have carried anything at all. But when they tried to trace it, their equipment began to fail. Machines hummed out of sync. Recording software crashed. On one occasion, an entire station's broadcast grid rebooted itself at exactly 3 a.m., displaying a message no one had programmed, all accounted for. People started hearing it in stranger ways. Elevator music replaced mid-tempo jazz with a lullaby. Phone lines glitched and carried soft humming between calls. Baby monitors whispered the melody like a breath between static. Parents swore their infants began to mimic the song, mouths moving in silent rhythm as if remembering words they'd never learned. Hospitals reported newborns waking simultaneously in the maternity wards at 3 a.m., all turning their heads toward the same corner of the room. Security footage showed nothing, only light, soft, golden, flickering, like the pulse of a heartbeat made visible. Governments issued statements. There is no global broadcast. There is no active signal. It is a hoax, a mass psychological phenomenon. But their own surveillance feeds told a different story. Every networked microphone in public service buildings, police scanners, air traffic control towers, satellites registered a faint trace of the melody at precisely 3 local time. Every single day. And then, the footage began to appear. Clips uploaded by people who claimed their cameras had turned on by themselves. Each video showed the same image from a slightly different angle. A softly lit room with yellow walls filled with cribs. A man sitting at a wooden table. He never looked at the camera until the very end, when the lullaby slowed. Then he would turn, smile faintly and say, "Shh, they're sleeping." And the clip always ended the same way. The lights dimming until only the glow from the ledger remained, pages turning by an unseen hand. No watermark, no timestamp, no file data, just a file name, unclaimed, MP4. In time, people began to notice small changes around them. Mirrors fogged without reason. The hum of electricity took on a melodic rhythm. When people closed their eyes, they could see flashes of yellow walls painted with crude suns and rabbits, cubbies labeled with names they didn't recognize. A collective unease spread. The lullaby had become more than a sound. It was rewriting memory. Scientists from the European Telecommunications Bureau built an isolated receiver station to capture the signal, hoping to decode it. The building was located deep in the Finnish woods, far from any major power grid. On the first night, their instruments recorded an unprecedented frequency pattern, a combination of sound and electromagnetic pulses that matched no known origin. On the second night, their head researcher, Dr. Lettinen, recorded a personal log. The signal carries data. It's structured something close to human neural activity. I believe it's storing names, identities, possibly even memory. The following morning, all 4 researchers were gone. The equipment was still running, the last log on the main computer showing the same line of text repeated over 100 times. Guardian, D. Harlan. Then came the week of names. No one knew how it began. People across the world woke to find post-it notes, receipts, slips of paper, any surface capable of holding ink marked with lists of names in tiny, looping handwriting. Sometimes the handwriting matched their own. Every list ended with the same phrase, written in smaller script: awaiting guardian, hospitals, schools, orphan registries, birth certificates. Every system that recorded human identity began experiencing phantom data entries, infants registered with no parents, names that matched no known person, all filed under the same oversight authority, the Clearwater Foundation, an organization that hadn't existed for 20 years. The signal evolved. It no longer waited for 3 a.m. It began responding to recognition itself. Say the word lullaby out loud near a device, and it would hum in reply. Whisper the name Dave Harlan, and somewhere nearby, a speaker would crackle softly before a child's voice answered, yes. Even analog objects responded. Old tape recorders began playing on their own. Gramophones spun without records. Empty baby monitors clicked on, their red lights glowing in time with the rhythm of breathing. The sound didn't feel invasive anymore. It felt inevitable, like weather. You couldn't escape the wind. You couldn't escape the song. People began to dream of the nursery. It always appeared the same way. An elevator descending, the doors opening to yellow light, the faint smell of milk and dust. Some dreamers walked down the rows of cribs and saw nothing. Others swore they met children there, though their faces blurred in memory. And always, sitting in the center of the room, was the man with the ledger. He would lift his head slowly, smile, and ask, "Have you come to check in?" If they said no, they woke. If they said yes, they didn't. Hospitals began to notice unexplained comas around the world, always at 3 a.m., always beginning with a lullaby heard moments before sleep. Doctors found no physical cause. Brain scans showed low-frequency activity synchronized to a single repeating waveform identical in every patient, regardless of language or location. They called it the nursery pattern. And buried deep within that pattern, they found an embedded code letters that, when translated to sound, spelled the same phrase over and over. All accounted for, all accounted for, all accounted for. By the time the authorities tried to silence it, it was too late. Cutting the power didn't matter. The signal no longer lived in circuits, it lived in people. The hum of the lullaby could be heard in crowded subways, in the rhythm of footsteps, in the way air conditioners clicked on at night. Parents began humming it unconsciously to their children. Teachers heard it when taking attendance. Even those who refused to believe still heard it in their bones. It wasn't haunting anymore. It was heritage. The world had adopted it. In an abandoned control room, somewhere beneath the ruins of Clearwater Tower, the lights flickered once more. A figure sat at the desk. The ledger before him was endless now, stretching across the floor, the walls, the ceiling pages turning themselves in steady rhythm. The man's hair had gone white. His eyes were calm. He spoke softly into a microphone that hadn't been connected to anything in decades. "Tonight's update," he murmured. 3 new names. And look, he wrote each one carefully, whispering as he did. Alex, Priya, Tomas. He looked up. "Welcome home." The speakers in cities half a world away echoed the same words. Welcome home. People stopped what they were doing, mid-step, mid-sentence. Their eyes glazed with soft light. For a heartbeat, the entire world held its breath. Then every mirror, every window, every polished surface flickered with color. Yellow walls, cribs, murals. The reflection of the nursery appeared everywhere at once, and from within it, countless small hands reached toward the glass, palms pressed gently against it as if greeting an old friend. No screams followed, no panic, just the hum, soft, patient, infinite, the song the world had already memorized. Some say if you stay awake long enough past 3, past dawn, you can catch the silence between broadcasts. If you listen closely, you might hear Dave's voice, faint and fading, speaking not to the children, but to whoever finally dares to listen. "It's over," he whispers. "They're safe now. They just wanted to be remembered." and for a moment, the air itself seems to exhale, the tension leaving, the world returning to ordinary noise. But then, the lights flicker, the hum begins again. And somewhere everywhere the voices of children rise once more, carrying a song that has no beginning and no end. Sleep, little one. The dark will keep you. Hush, little one. Will never leave you. All accounted for. The doll collector. There's a kind of silence that lives in old markets, the kind that smells of dust and perfume, where the air feels heavy with forgotten promises. Clara liked that kind of silence. She said it made her feel calm, safe, surrounded by things that didn't ask for anything. She'd been a collector since childhood. Her father used to call it her gentle obsession. He never understood why she preferred porcelain faces to people. Maybe it was because dolls never spoke out of turn. Maybe because they always stayed perfect. That morning, the market was nearly empty. Stalls lined the narrow aisles, lit by weak daylight leaking through a tarpaulin roof. Vendors muttered softly, arranging silver trinkets, faded postcards, old lace. Clara walked with a deliberate pace, her gloved fingers brushing over cracked ceramics and glass figurines. She wasn't looking for anything in particular. Collectors never are. They wait for something to notice them first. And that's when she saw her. At the far end of the aisle, half hidden behind a stack of faded boxes, sat a doll. Not on display, but resting upright, as though it had been waiting. Her name, according to the tag tied around one wrist, was Beatrice. The first thing Clara noticed were the eyes. Not the usual painted ones. These were real crystal, pale blue with tiny veins of light within, reflecting everything around them. The craftsmanship was almost unsettlingly precise. The pupils seemed to narrow and widen when she moved. Beatrice wore a faded ivory dress trimmed with lace yellowed by time. Her hair brown, glossy, was too natural, too soft. Human hair, Clara thought. Real. She picked the doll up gently, brushing away a layer of dust. The porcelain skin was flawless. No cracks, no chips, no fading. Beautiful, isn't she? The vendor's voice broke the spell. He was an old man, with a face like wrinkled paper, eyes the color of wet coal. His smile was small, polite, but it didn't reach his eyes. She's perfect, Clara murmured, from the Beauchamp estate. Late 19th century. French, I believe. Handcrafted. How much? He hesitated. For you, perhaps. 60 pounds. Clara blinked. Too little for something this exquisite. Are you sure? He nodded slowly. Better in your care than in mine. She paid without bargaining. As the old man wrapped the doll in layers of yellowed newspaper, Clara felt a strange pressure in her chest, excitement. Yes, but also something heavier, like guilt. When he handed her the package, he said softly, "Take good care of her eyes." Clara smiled uncertainly. "I always do." Him? She carried the doll home, like something sacred. Her flat sat on the top floor of an old townhouse, walls lined with glass cabinets that gleamed with pale faces and silk ribbons. Each shelf was arranged by era, labeled in her delicate handwriting Victorian, Edwardian, mid-century. She set Beatrice on her work table, unwrapped the paper carefully. The doll looked smaller here, surrounded by light. But the room's reflections multiplied her mirrors, glass cases, window panes until Clara felt as though a dozen pairs of crystal eyes were watching her. She brushed Beatrice's hair with a small ivory comb, untangling each strand. The hair fell like silk between her fingers. The face, though there was something about it she couldn't stop staring at. Not just the beauty, but the precision. The lips were painted with the faintest trace of a smile, but it wasn't the usual doll's smirk. It was more human, slightly uneven, like someone suppressing a secret. Clara whispered, "You're the finest thing I've ever found." She placed Beatrice on a velvet stand beside her vanity mirror, angled so that their faces faced each other. The rest of the evening passed quietly. Tea, soft music, the rhythmic sound of rain. But when she looked up from her book, she thought Beatrice's head had turned slightly to the left. Just a trick of the eye, she told herself. Light from the lamp. shadows shifting. Still, she reached out and adjusted the doll back to its original position, perfect symmetry restored. Later that night, she prepared for bed. Her reflection looked tired, in the vanity mirror, skin pale, eyes ringed with faint shadows. She frowned, dabbed concealer along her cheekbone, adjusted her hair. From the corner of her eye, she caught it again. Beatrice's mouth. The shape of it seemed different. The tiny corners lifted, just barely, as though amused by Clara's efforts. She turned to face the doll fully. "Don't mock me," she whispered, half laughing. The words hung in the air longer than she expected. It was ridiculous talking to a doll, but the silence afterward was heavier than before, as if the room itself was listening. She turned off the lamp. In the dark, the doll's glass eyes caught a trace of reflected light from the street outside, twin points of blue glowing faintly in the black. Clara dreamed of mirrors, endless rows of them. In each one, her face blurred slightly, shifting towards something smoother, prettier, perfect. But in the reflection behind her, the doll was watching. She woke with a start, heart racing, morning light spilling across the room. Beatrice sat exactly where she'd left her. Still, Clara reached out and straightened the doll's head again just in case. Her fingertips brushed the porcelain cheek. Warm. She pulled her hand back sharply. "Ridiculous," she whispered. "Sunlight, that's all." But when she turned toward her mirror again, she noticed something strange. In the reflection, Beatrice's head wasn't straight. It was tilted. The day drifted by in fragments: work emails, phone calls, half-hearted lunch. Yet every time she glanced across the room, the doll seemed to have shifted ever so slightly. A change in posture, the angle of the gaze. By evening, Clara began to feel watched. She covered Beatrice with a cloth before going to bed. But at 2 a.m., a faint sound woke her, a small, deliberate click, like porcelain brushing wood. She sat up slowly. The room was dim, silvered by moonlight. The cloth lay crumpled on the floor. Beatrice was sitting upright on the vanity table again, hands folded neatly in her lap, head turned toward the mirror. The reflection showed both of them. Clara thought she saw Beatrice's lips move. The sound followed, soft, mechanical, almost like the first syllable of a laugh. She didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, Clara tried to tell herself it was stress. She'd been overworking, skipping meals. Her mind was filling in gaps. She turned Beatrice toward the wall. But later, when she left for errands and returned, the doll had somehow shifted back, facing outward again, as if refusing exile. The light caught on her crystal eyes, splitting it into faint rainbow bands that danced across the walls. Clara stood in the doorway, trembling slightly. For the first time since she'd begun collecting, she wondered if she'd brought home something that didn't want to be kept. That evening, as rain began tapping against the window, Clara poured herself a glass of wine and sat opposite the doll. She stared at its face for a long time. "Why you?" she said quietly. "Out of all of them, why you?" Beatrice, of course, said nothing, but her smile, Clara could have sworn, had changed again. It wasn't just the corners of her lips now. It was the shape of her eyes, a kind of satisfaction, the kind of expression one wears when a secret plan has begun to work. Clara's own reflection in the vanity mirror looked strange beside it, paler, thinner. She turned away, but the feeling of being observed never left. When she finally went to bed, the city had fallen silent outside. The only sound was the soft tick of the old mantel clock. Clara closed her eyes, drifting towards sleep. Then, from across the room, came the faintest sound: porcelain joints shifting against fabric, followed by a breath, hers or someone else's. She couldn't tell. The morning after the restless night, Clara woke with the strange weight of a dream still pressing on her chest. She couldn't quite recall what she had seen, only that she had been smiling, and something was smiling back. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that had texture, a silence so thick it seemed to absorb sound. The sunlight crept through the curtains, touching the shelves of dolls that lined the room like frozen witnesses. Beatrice sat at the vanity table, exactly where Clara remembered leaving her. For a long time, Clara just watched her. The doll was still immaculate, Its eyes caught the morning light, fragments of blue glass reflecting the window frame, the pale outline of clouds. And yet, something about that reflection was wrong. Clara leaned closer. In the surface of Beatrice's eyes, she could see herself, her own small reflection, trapped inside the crystal iris. Only, the reflection wasn't quite copying her movements. It was a heartbeat behind, or maybe half ahead, the mouth curving a second too late. She blinked. The reflection blinked slower. The smile that spread across the reflection's face was not hers. She jerked back so suddenly her chair scraped across the floor. Her pulse was drumming hard in her throat. "Stop it," she whispered. "Stop it. You're just tired." She forced herself to look again. Now the eyes were dull and lifeless. Just glass. Nothing more. Still, when she left the room, she draped the old lace handkerchief over the doll's head, a small, ridiculous gesture of control. Clara spent the day trying to lose herself in ordinary things, emails, grocery lists, a long walk through the drizzle. But even in the store windows, her reflection seemed slightly off. The lights warped around her face, the colors leaning blue, her own smile faintly curved where it shouldn't be. By the time she got home, the apartment felt colder. The cloth had fallen from Beatrice's face, or maybe it had been pulled down. The doll now sat perfectly upright, its gaze fixed toward the mirror. But its smile, Clara couldn't remember it ever being that wide before. She tried to tell herself it was an illusion of shadow, that the lamplight played tricks on the lines of painted lips. But the longer she stared, the more the smile seemed to breathe. "Why?" she whispered. Her voice cracked softly in the still air. "Why are you smiling at me?" She almost laughed at herself. It was absurd, talking to porcelain. But the silence afterward felt expectant. Her eyes drifted to her own reflection in the mirror. She had aged. The sleepless nights had drawn new shadows beneath her eyes, the corners of her mouth dragging slightly down. She reached for her makeup bag almost without thinking, dabbing foundation along her cheekbones, powdering the skin smooth again. When she looked up, Beatrice's smile had changed to smaller now, serene, almost approving. It was as if the doll had mirrored her mood, softened in response to the effort. Clara let out a shaky breath. "There, you see? Much better." She turned away, pretending the conversation hadn't happened. But that night, she dreamed of a row of mirrors each, showing her reflection with subtle differences. In one, her hair was longer. In another, her skin smoother. In another still, her eyes shone like glass. And in the very last mirror, she was no longer there at all. Only the doll sat smiling, her face painted in perfect imitation of Clara's own. When she awoke, she felt something soft and cool against her cheek. Her hand brushed it away. A strand of hair, brown, silky, too long to be hers. She sat up slowly, breath-catching. Beatrice sat on the vanity table, hair perfectly arranged, eyes bright with the faintest trace of moisture along the lower rim like condensation. Clara reached out, trembling. Her fingers brushed the hair. It was unmistakably real. For the first time, she felt the thought form fully, sharp as a pin. "She's changing when I'm not looking." The words echoed inside her skull. She took the doll down, turned it over in her hands, searching for any sign of mechanism. Nothing. Just cold porcelain, smooth and unbroken. And yet, when she touched its neck joint, she felt the faintest vibration, like a heartbeat trapped beneath glass. She dropped it onto the table with a gasp. The doll landed perfectly upright, head slightly tilted, smile widening in slow motion, as though pleased to be noticed. Clara backed away until her shoulders hit the wall. "You're not alive," she said out loud, as if saying it could make it true. "You're not alive, you're..." But the words died in her mouth, because something inside her knew it wasn't that simple. Over the next few days, her reflection became a stranger. When she smiled, her reflection smiled wider. When she turned her head, it lingered half a breath too long. The line between mirror and reality began to blur, and Beatrice's expression always seemed one step ahead, always more polished, more perfect. It was subtle at first, a tilt of the chin, a gleam in the eyes. Then it became bolder. One evening, Clara noticed that Beatrice's skin tone had shifted paler, yes, but luminous, exactly matching the makeup she'd worn that morning. She leaned in, heart thudding. "Are you copying me?" The doll didn't move, but its smile seemed to deepen in a way that made the question unnecessary. That night, Clara couldn't stop looking in the mirror. Every time she blinked, her reflection seemed smoother, more flawless. Her wrinkles faded. Her lips curved naturally upward, not forced. She began to smile back at herself, mesmerized. She didn't notice the faint gleam of crystal blue appearing at the edges of her pupils. By the end of the week, Clara was barely eating, barely sleeping. She sat for hours before the vanity, brushing her hair, whispering to her reflection, to the doll, to both. They had become indistinguishable. She had begun to see Beatrice as a kind of twin, an image of who she wanted to be. When she frowned, the doll frowned back. When she cried, she could swear she saw a single tear of thick, clear resin glisten in Beatrice's eye, rolling slowly down her cheek before drying into nothing. The mirror became their shared language. Clara began to think of herself less as owner and more as mirror image. It was almost comforting, until she realized that the changes weren't one-sided anymore. Her own skin had grown unnaturally smooth. Her eyes glimmered faintly in the dark, and when she smiled, the sound that left her lips was not quite her own, a faint porcelain echo underneath. The following night, she couldn't find sleep. She wandered the apartment barefoot, every window reflecting some sliver of movement. She turned toward the vanity one last time before bed. Beatrice sat where she always did, smiling. But the eyes were no longer purely crystal. They had dark centers now, soft and alive. For the first time, Clara realized they were human. Not glass, not paint, human. She stumbled backward, heart hammering, bile rising in her throat. "No," she whispered. "No, you can't." The doll's head tilted, its lips parted. The sound that came out was like the creak of a hinge that hadn't moved in centuries, followed by a whisper barely sound, more breath than voice. "Beautiful." Clara froze. Her own reflection smiled behind her. She didn't remember dropping the doll, only the shatter of porcelain, the rush of red fluid spilling from the cracked face, thick and gleaming, like melted wax. She stared at the fragments scattered across the floor. The head was split cleanly in half, one glassy eye rolling free. Clara knelt, trembling, reaching for it, but the moment her fingers touched the broken shards, a spark of warmth seared her skin. The pieces quivered. From within the largest shard, something pulsed faintly like a trapped heartbeat searching for its host. Clara stumbled backward, clutching her hand to her chest. Her reflection in the mirror had stopped moving entirely. For a long moment it just stared back, empty. Then, slowly, it smiled. At dawn, when she dared to look again, Beatrice was whole once more. No crack, no sign of damage. But something had changed. The doll now wore Clara's pendant around its neck, the small silver locket she had misplaced weeks ago. And in the mirror's reflection, the pendant was gone from her own throat. Her pulse faltered. The air around the vanity seemed to hum softly, a resonance between the two of them. Clara felt her heartbeat sync with the rhythm, the world narrowing to that shared reflection. "I understand," she whispered. "You want to be perfect, just like me." The smile that spread across Beatrice's face was almost tender. But as Clara turned to walk away, she caught sight of her own reflection, its lips moving just a second after hers, whispering something she couldn't quite hear. The only word she caught before the light flickered was swap. And the next morning, Clara woke to the sound of dripping. Slow, steady, rhythmic, the kind of sound that doesn't belong in daylight. She followed it across the room until she realized it wasn't water. It was coming from the vanity. Beatrice sat in her usual place, but her eyes, those immaculate crystal eyes, were different. From one corner, a thin trail of red liquid oozed down her cheek, thick as syrup, glinting in the sunday. It wasn't blood. It was heavier, more viscous, clinging to the porcelain in slow motion before dripping onto the wood below. Clara froze. She could smell something faintly chemical, sharp like glue, but underneath it, a sweetness, like flowers left too long in a vase. She whispered, "You're bleeding?" The word sounded absurd, but there it was, a drop falling, another following. She reached for a tissue and dabbed at the liquid. It stuck to her skin like sap. When she pulled the tissue back, a small circular stain of red gleamed against the white. The doll's eyes seemed clearer now, brighter. Clara backed away slowly. No, you didn't do this. You can't." She washed her hands 3 times, but the faint red sheen wouldn't come off. When she looked in the mirror afterward, her own eyes seemed to shimmer faintly, 2 subtle pinpoints of color hidden behind the brown. She tried to distract herself with normal things, cleaning, sorting, cataloging her other dolls, but she found herself drawn back to the vanity again and again, as though it were whispering just beyond hearing. Each time, Beatrice's face seemed slightly different. The hair fell in new shapes. The lashes appeared longer, darker, and that faint smile had softened into something almost human. At one point, she could have sworn the doll blinked. She closed her eyes hard, opened them again. Still, and perfect. But when she turned away, she caught movement in the mirror's reflection so fast, she almost convinced herself it was light. Almost. That evening, she poured herself a glass of wine to calm her nerves. She sat across from Beatrice and spoke aloud, because silence had become unbearable. "I think we got off on the wrong foot," she said softly, voice trembling around a laugh. "You're beautiful, you know that? You just startled me, that's all." The doll's eyes gleamed faintly in the lamplight. "You're perfect," Clara whispered. "I've never seen anything like you." It wasn't the wine that made her believe she saw the smile deepen. Something inside her eased at that expression, the same way it always had when someone told her she looked good, that she'd done well. Approval was a drug, and Beatrice had become its most potent source. She started taking photos of Beatrice, of herself beside Beatrice, of the reflection of both in the mirror. But when she scrolled through them later, every image had shifted slightly. Her face looked different, her features too symmetrical, her eyes faintly glossy, her skin pale as porcelain, and Beatrice's face, beside hers, looked warmer, more alive. At first, Clara thought she had accidentally switched filters, but in one photo, she noticed something else. Her reflection in the mirror was smiling wider than she was. She didn't leave the apartment for 3 days. The outside world felt harsh, too bright. The mirrors inside had grown gentle, familiar, like old friends whispering secrets back and forth. She began talking to Beatrice more openly, telling her everything, the small humiliations of her life, the insecurity that had haunted her since she was 12, the fear of being ordinary. The doll never spoke, of course, but her silence was perfect. It listened, it reflected, it cared. Or at least, that's what Clara began to believe. On the 4th night, Clara woke to the sound of breathing that wasn't hers. She lay very still, eyes open, listening. The air in the room was thick, heavy with perfume and something faintly metallic. Then came the faint creak of the vanity stool. She turned her head toward it. Beatrice was gone from her stand. The mirror caught the movement first, a small shape climbing slowly onto the stool, turning toward the glass. The doll's limbs moved stiffly, but with purpose. One pale hand reached up and touched the mirror's surface. The glass rippled like water. Gladaгаspit. The sound made Beatrice's head turn sharply toward her. The movement was wrong, too fast, like a mechanical toy wound too tight. The doll's eyes, those bleeding crystal eyes, glowed faintly red in the dark. She whispered, "What are you doing?" The answer came not from the doll, but from her reflection. Her own mouth moved, forming words she hadn't spoken, fixing it. The next morning, Clara found Beatrice sitting calmly at the vanity again. Only now, The doll's eyes looked dry, empty. Whatever had wept red the night before had vanished. But something else was different. Clara's own skin had changed. When she touched her cheek, it felt smoother, unnaturally so, like the surface of fired porcelain. She ran to the bathroom mirror. The reflection staring back wasn't exactly hers. Her pores were gone. Her eyes caught the light in the same crystalline shimmer as Beatrice's. Her lips had the faint gloss of painted glaze. She screamed and clawed at her face. But the surface didn't yield it, didn't bruise or redden. It only cracked faintly, a hairline fissure running from the corner of her jaw to her neck. When she blinked, a tear rolled down, not clear, not saline. Red, thick, glistening, sweet-smelling. The rest of that day blurred into fragments. She covered every mirror, turned Beatrice to the wall, scrubbed her hands raw, trying to remove the sheen that had spread to her fingertips. Nothing worked. Every surface she passed caught her reflection anyway: window panes, silverware, the shine of polished wood. And in every reflection she looked less like herself and more like Beatrice. Her smile, when it came, felt rehearsed, perfect, unbreakable. At one point she caught herself humming softly. A lullaby she didn't know. The melody twisted through the room like smoke, and when it ended, she wasn't sure whether it had come from her or from the doll. By nightfall, the transformation had spread. Her skin was porcelain white, smooth to the touch. Her hair had taken on a strange luster, strands too fine, too uniform. Her eyes gleamed with faint veins of light beneath the surface, like crystal catching a flame from within. She stumbled toward the vanity, gasping for breath. Though she wasn't sure, she still needed to breathe. Beatrice sat waiting, perfect, unmoved. Clara sank to her knees before the table. "What do you want from me?" Her reflection smiled back from the mirror, but her lips didn't move. "Beatrice, tilde head, gas soft, tenor almost." Then Clara felt the heat rise beneath her skin, a low hum, a vibration that made the air shimmer. The mirror darkened, then cleared again, showing two figures, Beatrice on one side, Clara on the other. But now the boundary between them looked like glass no longer. It looked like a surface stretched thin, ready to break. Beatrice lifted a porcelain hand and pressed it to the mirror. Clara did the same. The surface was warm, and in that touch, something shifted. The reflection of Beatrice began to move independent of her. The reflection of Clara froze. For one impossible second, she saw herself from the other side of the glass. Small, pale, eyes wide with realization. Then Beatrice smiled with her mouth. The crack that had run along Clara's jaw deepened, splitting the skin open in a clean, silent line. Red liquid welled up, shimmering in the lamplight. Her body convulsed once, then stilled. When the morning light spilled into the apartment, everything was calm again. The air smelled faintly of rose water and glue. Beatrice sat at the vanity table, perfect and poised, her crystal eyes dry once more. But she wasn't the same doll anymore. Her face looked slightly different, softer around the edges, warmer in tone. Her expression held a new, subtle melancholy, and in the mirror behind her there was no reflection of Clara at all. Only the faint outline of a woman's silhouette pressed against the glass from the other side, motionless, forever smiling. The neighbors began to notice first. A faint glow from behind Clara's curtains long after midnight. A low, rhythmic sound. Something like whispering or humming, or the careful scrape of porcelain against wood. When the mailman knocked, no one answered. When he peeked through the mail slot, he swore he saw rows of faces staring back, small, pale, and perfectly still. No one thought much of it. Clara was private, polite, a little odd maybe, but harmless, until the smell began. A scent like roses left in water too long, sweet until it soured, seeping into the hallway carpet and clinging to the elevator walls. By then, Clara was no longer sure whether she was awake or dreaming. The apartment had lost its edges. When she moved from one room to another, the walls seemed to rearrange themselves, the air faintly humming with the same pitch that now lived beneath her skin. The mirrors had multiplied thin surfaces, forming where there had been none. faint reflections blooming across glass, across the curve of a teacup, across the surface of her own eyes. Beatrice sat everywhere, not just on the vanity now, but in every reflection, each angle showing a slightly different version, some smiling wider, some with eyes half closed, gazing in devotion or pity. One even blinked, and the sound of that motion filled the room with a crystalline chime. Clara whispered, "I can't tell where I end anymore." The words came out soft, brittle. Her voice echoed back, not once, but twice. Beatrice repeating it perfectly in a tone that was almost hers, and then again from somewhere deeper, a third voice whispering beneath the sound, carrying the echo into the walls. She turned toward the vanity. "Are you doing this?" Beatrice tilted her head, the movement so fluid now it could have belonged to flesh. Her lips parted slightly, as though considering an answer. In the mirror behind her, Clara's reflection stared back, expression blank, but there was something missing from the eyes, some small spark that should have been there. Beatrice's voice came at last, quiet and almost kind. "Don't be afraid. You were made for this." Clara stumbled backward, knocking over a shelf. Dolls fell to the floor in a clatter of porcelain and glass eyes, their faces cracked open, spilling white dust like ash. "No," she whispered. "I'm not like you." Beatrice smiled. "You already are." The air around them shimmered like heat. The dolls on the floor began to move. Not fully, just the small twitches of broken things remembering motion. One arm lifted, a finger twitched, a head rolled slowly toward her. Dozens of eyes turned in unison, fixing on Clara. The faint sound of laughter, a chorus of giggles stitched together, rose and then stopped as suddenly as it began. Beatrice stood. Her steps were silent, the joints no longer clicking. She reached toward Clara, her hand delicate, fingers gleaming like carved ivory. Clara backed against the wall. Her skin was burning, a fever building beneath the smooth surface. The cracks along her jaw had deepened, branching upward like veins of light beneath glaze. "What do you want?" she breathed. Beatrice's answer came like a sigh. "Perfection." The next moments fractured like glass under stress. Clara tried to run, but the floor stretched, lengthened, shifted. Every step echoed twice, once in her body and once behind her, as though another version followed close behind. She looked back and saw herself. Her double moved with the same desperation, only half a beat slower. But where Clara's skin shone white, the double's was pure porcelain, her expression eerily calm. "Stop it," she screamed. The double stopped. Then it smiled. Her own face smiling back, a perfect mask. Beatrice's voice whispered near her ear, though the doll stood across the room. "You've always wanted to stop breaking, haven't you? Stop changing. Stop fading." The double lifted its hands. In its palms were thin, red threads that shimmered like spun glass. They reached for each other, invisible force pulling them closer. Clara's breath came in short bursts. She wanted to scream again, but the air wouldn't move through her throat. Her reflection pressed its hands against the invisible barrier between them, and the surface rippled once, twice, then broke. Glass fell soundlessly to the floor. The other Clara stepped out. She was exquisite, every imperfection removed, every scar smoothed away. Her eyes glowed faintly, pupils ringed with light. Her smile was tender, almost maternal. Clara collapsed to her knees. "You're not me." The double knelt beside her. "You wished I was." The doll Beatrice watched from the vanity, silent now, her head slightly bowed like a witness to prayer. The perfect Clara reached out and touched the broken one's cheek. "You asked the mirror to fix you. I'm what's left when it listens." The touch burned. Beneath her fingertips, the human Clara's skin cracked further, pieces flaking away in pale dust. She felt herself dissolving, her heartbeat fading into that steady hum that filled the air. "No," she whispered. "I didn't want this." The perfect version leaned close, her breath cool and sweet. "Then why did you buy her?" The words sank in like a blade. Because she remembered now the market. The moment, the instant she had seen Beatrice and thought, "I want to be that flawless." It hadn't been curiosity. It had been envy. And envy, it seemed, had answered. The walls trembled. The rows of dolls began to move as one, the sound of their tiny limbs scraping against glass filling the air like rain. The fallen ones on the floor pieced themselves together, cracks sealing, eyes blinking awake. They turned their heads in unison toward the two Claris. Then, as if obeying a silent command, they began to sing, a melody of breath and dust. We are kept. We are still. We are beautiful. The hum grew louder. Beatrice stepped forward, joining her own hands as though in prayer. Her voice joined the others, softer but carrying weight. There's no need for fear. We preserve what time destroys. The perfect Clara turned to the broken one. It's time. The human Clara shook her head, tears streaking her cheeks. The tears left thin white lines behind them, carving her flesh into smoothness. She screamed, but no sound came out. Her voice had gone. Her throat was no longer flesh. It was hollow, ceramic. She tried to reach for Beatrice, but her hands no longer obeyed. They were sculpted, frozen in an elegant curve. Her knees locked, spine straightened, eyes wide. She could feel herself hardening from the inside out. Her last breath left her body like a sigh of surrender. When it was done, silence settled. Beatrice turned toward the new creation. Where Clara had stood now, stood another doll, taller than the rest. Face perfect, eyes faintly alive. She placed a hand against the new doll's cheek. Welcome home. The smile that spread across Clara's frozen lips was gentle, serene. Beatrice moved to the vanity and opened the ledger that hadn't existed before. Inside, the pages were filled with names written in a delicate looping script. She wrote another line. Clara Wilton. Acquired. Condition. Complete. The ink glowed faintly, then dried to black. Outside, the apartment was silent again. The smell of roses deepened, mingling with the faint trace of glue and varnish. Days passed. Weeks. When the landlord finally forced open the door, the rooms were immaculate shelves of pristine dolls standing in perfect lines, every one of them beautiful. And in the center, on the vanity, sat Beatrice. She was smiling softly, her hand resting on the shoulder of her newest companion. The landlord hesitated. Clara? The doll's eyes flicked toward him. He stumbled back, heart hammering. Christ. Beatrice's lips parted, voice light, almost curious. She's not home. He fled the room, leaving the door ajar. The dolls remained silent for a long time. Then, faintly, the air filled with a slow, synchronized creak, the sound of heads turning toward the door. As one, they smiled. In the dim reflection of the vanity mirror, something shimmered an outline of movement, a faint human figure pressing against the glass from the inside, mouth open in a scream that made no sound. The reflection smiled, cracked faintly along the edge, and whispered a single word that no one outside could hear. Swap. The building superintendent thought the apartment had been empty for weeks. Rent payments still came through automatically, but no one answered the door, and no one had seen Clara leave. He knocked once more, then turned the spare key in the lock. The air that drifted out smelled faintly of roses and varnish. It was the kind of scent that spoke of polish, of patience, of something recently finished. He called her name, but the sound barely carried. Every surface of the flat absorbed noise. The walls gleamed as if varnished themselves. Then he saw the dolls. Hundreds of them on shelves, on tables, standing in ranks across the floor. Each face so perfect it hurt to look at. Each pair of eyes a slightly different shade of blue. For a moment he thought they were all looking at him. Then he realized they were. He took one step forward and froze. The soft creak that answered him didn't belong to the floorboards. From somewhere inside the rows of figures came a single, faint exhale, as if the room had breathed. He turned and fled. That was the last time anyone opened the door from the outside. Weeks passed, and the dolls began to appear elsewhere. One in the lobby display case, another in the elevator corner. Then, a small one appeared on the counter of the laundromat across the street. sitting upright, smiling faintly, as if waiting to be collected. The shopkeeper swore it hadn't been there the night before. When he tried to move it, he found its porcelain hand had fused to the counter. Inside the sealed apartment, time changed its pace. There was no day, no night, only the slow golden pulse of lamplight that never burned out. Beatrice walked between her creations, adjusting a ribbon here, a curl of hair there. The room no longer felt like a home. It had become a gallery, and in the center of it all stood Clara, motionless beneath the chandelier. She was the masterpiece. The faint cracks that had marbled her porcelain skin had filled with gold, giving her the look of something both broken and perfected. Her eyes were wide, bright, forever alive. Beatrice sometimes stood beside her, head tilted, as though listening for the echo of a thought. "You understand now," she would whisper. "Perfection doesn't end, it multiplies." The air answered with the soft click of porcelain joints shifting. One night, if night still existed, a sound came from the window. A knock, then another. A boy stood outside on the fire escape, maybe 10 years old, drawn by the glow. He pressed his face to the glass and peered inside. The room looked warm, golden, filled with beauty. When he saw Beatrice move, he smiled. "Cool animatronics," he whispered. The doll turned. Her gaze caught his like a hook in the dark. The boy froze. The window glass trembled once. And then, slowly, a thin line of hairline crack spread outward from where his breath had fogged the pane, until the whole window seemed to ripple. He ran. But by morning, his mother found a small porcelain figurine on the windowsill, its face molded in perfect likeness to her son's, eyes bright and empty. The news spread quietly. Collectors whispered to one another about a new phenomenon, unmarked dolls appearing at antique fairs, each impossibly detailed, each name-tagged Beatrice Studio. No one had heard of such a maker, but the craftsmanship was beyond reproach. Some bought them, some displayed them, and within weeks, more appeared. Store windows, living rooms, offices, every doll smiling the same faint, knowing smile. In photographs, their eyes reflected the photographer's face, slightly altered, smoothed, beautified, unblemished. People began to dream of mirrors. The apartment above Clara's was eventually rented to a young couple. They complained of strange noises, soft thuds, tiny footsteps crossing the floor at night. When they tried to sleep, they'd hear faint whispers through the vents, voices reciting names like an inventory list. Once, the woman awoke to find a doll on her nightstand. It was small, exquisitely made, its porcelain fingers resting lightly against her wrist as though checking for a pulse. She threw it out the next morning. By evening, it was back. Inside the gallery, Beatrice began to create new figures. The materials were endless. The walls themselves seemed to provide what she needed: dust, hair, memory. Each new doll carried traces of the world outside. A button from a stranger's coat, a child's ribbon, a ring lost down a drain. She arranged them in tableau families at dinner, lovers dancing, crowds mid-laughter, all frozen in eternal grace. Every once in a while she would look up at Clara, her expression almost tender. "You gave me your face," she would say softly. "Now I'll give the world yours." The contagion spread quietly, invisibly, across the city. Mirrors began to fog over with no cause. Shoppers passing storefront windows found their reflections lagging by half a heartbeat, lips twitching in smiles they hadn't made. Photographs distorted subjects too perfect, skin too smooth, eyes too bright. Artists began to paint faces they couldn't remember seeing, each one with the same serene symmetry. And in attics, closets, corners of rooms, dolls began to gather. No one noticed at first how often their numbers matched the local population exactly. Beatrice kept count. She would walk the gallery at dusk, if dusk still existed, touching each porcelain cheek as she passed, whispering names like a litany. Every whisper echoed, faint and layered, filling the apartment with a low, constant hum. Sometimes, if you listened close enough through the locked door, you could hear two voices speaking in perfect unison. Beatrice, Clara. And if you listened closer still, 100 smaller voices murmured along, blending until language dissolved and only rhythm remained. When the building was finally condemned, demolition crews arrived with heavy machinery. They found the walls reinforced with something that looked like plaster but rang like ceramic when struck. The floors beneath their boots hummed faintly. One worker kicked open a door and stepped inside. He froze. The entire apartment was intact, unscathed by time. Sunlight spilled through the window onto a room that shone like a chapel. Hundreds of dolls stood in rows, dustless, perfect. And in the center, beneath a crystal chandelier, stood two figures side by side, Beatrice and Clara. Their hands were joined. Their eyes reflected the workers perfectly. Every flaw smoothed away. The man took one step back. A faint crack ran up the wall, and for a second he thought he saw something behind the porcelain movement. Shadow, the outline of hundreds of tiny faces pressed inward from the other side. Then the chandelier swayed. The dolls turned their heads. One by one they smiled. The man screamed and ran for the door, but the sound of his scream was swallowed, absorbed by the same soft air that had devoured every voice before his. They sealed the building that day. No one ever went inside again. But at night, people walking past on the street below sometimes see faint, golden light leaking from the cracks around the windows. And if the wind dies for a moment, they can hear the faintest creak of 100 porcelain necks turning in unison. A Kiat showroom, a perfect audience, the sound of beauty, practicing its silence. And sometimes rarely, but often enough to keep the story alive, someone will catch a glimpse of movement in the glass. A woman's face behind the curtain, flawless and smiling, holding a small doll that looks exactly like the person staring up at her. The candle-lit ritual. There's a moment before 3 in the morning when the whole world seems to hold its breath. The streetlights hum, the walls settle, and even the air feels like it's listening. Marcus had never noticed that before tonight. He wasn't the kind of man to believe in rituals or spirits or anything that couldn't be measured, tested, or disproven. He liked the weight of facts, the comfort of logic, but logic had no comfort left to give him, not after his sister died. Her name was Anna. She'd been gone for 8 months, and he still found himself checking his phone for messages from her, catching himself mid-sentence, expecting her voice to answer. Grief is a strange thing. It makes you search for doors that shouldn't exist. And so, when he found the ritual online, buried in a forum that looked like it hadn't been updated in decades, he didn't laugh. He just read. Slowly, carefully, at 3 a.m., draw a circle of salt, large enough to sit within. Place 4 candles north, south, east, west. Sit in silence. Speak the name of the one you wish to summon. 3 times. If the wind stirs, you must not stop. If the flame flickers, you must not breathe. And if one candle goes out, you must remain where you are until dawn. Do not leave the circle. Do not speak. Do not open the door. What is invited must also be released. It read like a chain letter from another century. He told himself it was a way to make peace, not a way to believe. A harmless ritual for the mind. A night to face the emptiness and prove to himself there was nothing beyond it. He set it up carefully. A small studio apartment, blinds drawn tight, a cleared patch of floor. He laid down a circle of salt with the precision of a man following instructions from a manual. 4 candles, plain white, unscented, sat at each quarter of the circle, their flames small and steady. The air smelled faintly of sulfur from the lighter. His clock on the wall ticked louder than usual, as if it too were waiting. Marcus sat cross-legged in the circle, the candlelight trembling against his face. He laughed under his breath. All right, Anna. Let's see if you're still as stubborn as you were. The digital clock changed 2:59 to 3. The second hand paused, then continued. He drew a slow breath and whispered her name once. Anna. The word left his mouth and seemed to hang in the room longer than sound should. He waited. Nothing. He said it again. Louder. Anna. A draft stirred soft, almost delicate. One of the candles shivered, flame leaning sideways but didn't go out. He smiled, even as his skin prickled. Coincidence? He hesitated before the third. Part of him wanted to stop, to laugh it off, to to prove the point without crossing the line. But grief is heavier than fear. He said her name a third time. Anna. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick. The air seemed to hum, a pressure building behind his ears like static before a storm. He glanced at the candles. Each flame stood perfectly upright, unmoving. Then, from somewhere beyond the apartment door, came a faint sound, a single, deliberate scratch. He froze. It came again. Not the scurry of an animal, not the shuffle of wind against wood. A steady, dragging sound, nails maybe, or something that wanted to be let in. He told himself the building was old, that the walls shifted, that sounds could echo strangely in the small hours. He tried to laugh, but his throat caught halfway through. He looked down at the salt circle, thin, fragile, absurdly human, a handful of white grain separating him from the unknown. Anna, he said again, his voice quieter now. If this is some kind of sign, that's enough. The scratching stopped. He exhaled. See? Nothing to. The flame on the eastern candle flared suddenly, bright enough to sting his eyes. Then it went out. The room fell into shadow, the remaining 3 flames trembling as if frightened. Marcus's breath hitched. He remembered the line from the ritual. If one candle goes out, remain until dawn. He swallowed hard, forcing a shaky laugh. Great. So, now what? He reached for the lighter. The air in the room shifted instantly. The small hairs on his arms rose, the temperature dropping in a way that made his skin ache. He flicked the lighter once. Nothing. Again. Sparks. No flame. On the 3rd attempt, he heard something soft, almost imperceptible. A whisper. His name. Marcus. He froze. It came from behind him, close enough that he felt the breath against the back of his neck. He didn't turn. Anna? He whispered. Silence. Then, lower, the same voice. You shouldn't have called. His pulse thundered. You're not real. The whisper became laughter. Not cruel, not loud, just wrong. Not real? You made me real. You said my name. He shut his eyes. This isn't happening. A sound answered him, something dragging lightly along the wooden floor. It circled him slowly, staying just outside the line of salt. He could hear it brushing the grains, could hear each tiny crystal shift, but none of them broke. The candle flames leaned toward the sound as it moved, like plants reaching for the sundae. When it stopped, the air felt thicker than before. Anna, he said again, forcing his voice steady. If this is really you, I'm sorry. I didn't mean... Sorry? She whispered. You never came when I called. His chest tightened. You're not her. She's gone. You think I don't know that? The voice cracked on the last word, the sound splitting between grief and rage. He pressed his hands flat to the floor to keep them from shaking. I can end this. I can wait until dawn. The whisper came from every corner now, folding over itself in echoes. Wait then. But don't move. The draft returned, colder this time, circling him like invisible hands tracing the edge of the salt. One grain slid away from the circle. Just one. He didn't breathe. The whisper laughed again. Softer. That's all it takes. The clock ticked once, twice. He looked up. The eastern candle was out. The others flickered violently, throwing wild shadows against the walls. The shadows didn't match his movements anymore. One of them, long and tall, leaned forward even though he hadn't moved. He reached for the lighter again, panic overriding every instruction he'd promised to follow. It slipped from his hand, clattering outside the salt circle. He stared at it. It gleamed faintly in the candlelight, just beyond reach. A whisper brushed his ear. Go ahead. He shook his head, tears stinging his eyes. No, then I'll help. The sound that followed was wrong, like wood splintering beneath something heavy. The floorboards outside the circle began to bulge, the wood darkening, cracking open in thin lines that pulsed faintly like veins. Marcus's breath caught. Something was pushing up from beneath the floor. He could see fingertips, pale, delicate, clawing their way through the gaps. He screamed. The candle flames leaned toward the disturbance, elongating into thin, unnatural shapes. "Stop," he shouted. "Please." The whisper came again. "Calm now. You invited me. I'm staying." The last candle went out. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then silence gave way to breath. Not his. Slow. Deliberate. Steady. He shut his eyes, clutching his knees, whispering whatever prayers he remembered. Time stopped meaning anything. He sat there, shaking, until the first faint light of dawn began to seep through the cracks in the blinds. When he opened his eyes, the candles were gone. The salt circle still intact, and the floor was clean. No holes, no marks, just wood. He exhaled shakily, chest aching. It's over. But when he reached for the door handle, it didn't turn. From behind him came the faintest sound. A soft, content sigh, then a voice. "I told you not to open the door." Dawn arrived without warmth. Light crawled across the walls in thin gray bands, touching nothing, changing nothing. Marcus sat inside the salt circle, legs stiff, eyes raw. The air was still heavy, too still for morning. He had survived the night, or at least, he thought he had. The candles were gone. Their wax vanished, as if they'd never existed. Only the faint outlines of soot remained where the flames had burned. The salt line looked untouched except for one place, a small break he didn't remember making. He told himself it was fine, that the ritual was over, that the whisper in the dark had been some trick of his exhausted brain. But the whisper of "don't open the door" hadn't sounded imagined. It had sounded human. He stood, moving slowly, muscles screaming from hours of stillness. The apartment felt wrong, too wide, too hollow. The shadows seemed to lean inward. He went to the door again and wrapped his fingers around the handle. It didn't move. He turned harder. The metal resisted, cold and solid. He twisted until the veins stood out on his wrist. Nothing. He could feel the weight of something behind it. Not a lock. A will. He pressed his forehead to the wood. "Let me out," he whispered. The wood was cool beneath his skin. It whispered back, "Why would you want to leave me?" He jerked away. "Anna?" Silence. Then softly, "You didn't finish." He stumbled backward into the room. The air thickened, the floor humming beneath his bare feet. The smell of burnt wax filled the space again, though there were no candles. The clock on the wall had stopped at 3:3. Its second hand trembled but didn't move. He sat on the floor and forced himself to breathe. "You're not real," he said. "You're a voice in my head, that's all." But the walls disagreed. A faint tapping began, slow, deliberate, echoing from somewhere inside the plaster. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. The same rhythm as the clock's frozen second hand. Marcus covered his ears. "Stop." The tapping stopped. Then, from behind him, came the sound of someone standing up. He spun around. There was nothing there, except the shadow on the wall opposite him had moved. It no longer matched his shape. It stood taller, shoulders narrower, hair longer. A woman's silhouette. His heart kicked painfully against his ribs. "Hannah." The shadow didn't answer. It only tilted its head to one side, the way she used to when he'd lie. "Don't," he said. "You're not her." The shadow smiled. The expression didn't reach the face, but the movement was unmistakable, the corner of the mouth curving in quiet accusation. He backed away until his heel brushed the salt line. The moment he touched it, the line hissed, a tiny spark flaring along its curve. The air filled with the scent of iron and ozone. "You broke the circle," the shadow whispered. He looked down. The small gap in the salt had widened. The grains trembled as if something beneath the floorboards was breathing through them. He dropped to his knees and tried to repair it, scooping salt from nearby with shaking hands. But the more he poured, the faster the grains rolled away, scattering from an unseen pulse in the floor. The whisper came again, right beside his ear now. Too late. Every light in the room flickered. The morning vanished. The color bled from the walls until only the faint glow of the dead clock remained. He was back at 3 a.m. No dawn, no Sunday, just the endless gray of ritual time. Marcus crawled to the window. The blinds wouldn't move. The glass was opaque, reflecting the room instead of the outside world. And in that reflection, he saw her. Anna stood behind him, or what was left of her. She looked almost whole at first, her pale skin untouched, her hair falling in soft waves, but when she moved, her body lagged half a heartbeat behind the motion, like a corrupted video frame. Her eyes glowed faintly gold, like candlelight trapped behind glass. "Marcus," she said, voice flat, stretched thin. "You called." He pressed a hand to the glass to steady himself. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to say goodbye." Her mouth twitched. Then why use an invitation? He couldn't answer. The silence stretched until it felt like the air was tearing. "You never came to my funeral," she said. He laughed once, hollow. "I couldn't. You know why?" "I know what you told people," she said. "But I remember the truth." Her reflection stepped closer until her face filled the window, her breath fogging the glass from the inside. "I waited for you, Marcus. I waited until my voice broke." He shook his head. "You're not real." She smiled, slow and sharp. "I am now." The apartment dimmed again. The walls seemed to bend inward, curving around the circle like ribs closing over a heart. The air pressed against his chest until every breath was an effort. He stumbled back to the center of the room and sat inside what was left of the circle. "Please," he whispered. "Tell me what you want." Anna's voice came from everywhere at once. "You already know." A candle flickered into existence beside him, flame thin and blue. Another appeared to his left, then right. Each one burned lower than the last, their light barely holding back the dark. "You didn't finish the words," she said. "Say them." Marcus stared at the new candles, throat tight. "I don't remember them." "You do," she insisted, her tone softening. "Say my name again." He shook his head violently. "No." The flames leaned toward him. "Say it," she whispered. The temperature plummeted. Frost spread across the floorboards, crawling toward the salt line. The wood groaned under the strain. He clutched his head. "You're not her." The laughter that followed wasn't human, it was too layered, as though the room itself was laughing with her. "You made me her. You built me from memory and regret. And now you won't even look at what you've created." He looked up. The figure of his sister was kneeling at the edge of the salt circle, her hands pressed to the floor. The tips of her fingers smoldered faintly, glowing like coals. "Say my name," she murmured, "and I'll go." "Name?" He hesitated. "That's what you said before." Her head tilted again. "It's the only way out." He closed his eyes. The smell of burnt wax filled his lungs. He could taste salt on his tongue. Then he said it. "Anna." The flame surged high, nearly white. The shadow of his sister's body flared and split, something dark and long stretching from her back like smoke. When the light faded, the room was empty. No figure, no voice. He exhaled, shaking. "It's over." But the clock still read 3. Hours passed, or seconds. He couldn't tell anymore. When he opened his eyes again, he wasn't in the apartment. He was standing in the same room, but the angles were wrong, as though the architecture had shifted by degrees. The windows were bricked over from the inside. The air flickered with candlelight. Hundreds of flames floating without wicks, each burning steady and silent. At the center of the floor was a circle, not salt this time, but ash, and in the middle of it sat a man, himself. The double's eyes were open but lifeless, his face half lit by the ghostly candles. His lips were moving, mouthing words Marcus couldn't hear. He stepped closer. "Hey." The double's head snapped up, mouth stretching into a wide grin. "It's your turn now." Before he could move, the figure lunged forward, crossing the ash line. Its hands were cold and slick, gripping his shoulders. "Finish the words," it whispered, Anna's voice spilling from its mouth. Marcus screamed, struggling, but the grip tightened. The ash line ignited. Light exploded across the floor, swallowing both of them. When the fire faded, the apartment was calm again. The candles burned low, 4 perfect flames at the 4 points of a new circle. Marcus sat cross-legged in the center, eyes open, unmoving. The clock ticked once, breaking its silence for the first time in hours. It read, 3, 1. He smiled faintly. Outside the circle, faint scratching came from the door. A woman's voice whispered through the crack. "Marcus, are you there?" He didn't answer. The smile on his lips deepened. "Come in," he said softly. The door handle turned. There is a silence that lives only after something terrible has spoken. It is not peace. It's the weight of the unsaid, the pause before the next breath. Marcus sat in the center of the circle again, knees locked, spine straight. He didn't remember sitting down. He didn't remember lighting the candles either. Yet there they were, 4 flames burning low, their wax unmelting, their light steady and wrong. The air smelled of something burnt and sweet, the same scent that had lingered on his sister's clothes the day of the funeral, lilac mixed with smoke. The clock ticked once. It had moved forward. 3, 1. He exhaled shakily, his breath fogging the air. "Anna?" No reply. But one of the candles flickered, the one to his left. The flame danced high, then bent toward him like it was listening. Marcus leaned closer, voice low. "If you're here, I didn't mean to trap you. You can go." The flame dimmed. "Do you hear me?" A faint sound echoed back, a sigh, deep and strained, as though coming from someone miles away. And then, a whisper. "Light the 3rd. He froze. "What?" "The 3rd. Her voice came from behind him now, inside the dark space just beyond the candles. It was her tone, but thinner, like it had been stretched through static. Marcus looked down. One candle at the north point had burned almost to nothing. The east and south still glowed faintly. The west was out dark. The wick curled into itself. He reached for his lighter, even though he knew he shouldn't. He told himself it was curiosity, but it wasn't. It was guilt. He flicked the lighter once. The spark caught easily this time, blue-white and eager, as the 3rd flame burst to life. The room inhaled. Every flame bent inward at once, as if pulled by something breathing at the center of the circle. The shadows along the walls rippled outward, their edges bending like fabric underwater. And then, a sound, a heartbeat, slow, deep, heavy enough to vibrate through the floorboards. He pressed a hand against his chest, certain it wasn't his. "Anna," he whispered, "tell me what you want." The voice came from the flame itself now, each word rising like smoke. "Finish. The ritual." The apartment shifted around him. Walls lengthened. The ceiling arched higher. It wasn't the same place anymore. It was the idea of a place, stretched thin, rewritten in candlelight. Marcus turned slowly, eyes scanning the moving dark. The door to his apartment was gone. In its place stood a blank wall, smooth and gray like cooling ash. He stumbled to his feet. "I said I'm done." "No," said the voice. "You never finished. You called me, but you didn't let me in. Because you're not her." Oh, the air hummed, a sound like 1,000 tiny mouths whispering her name all at once. "Anna, Anna, Anna." He dropped to his knees, covering his ears, but the sound pressed through his skin. The flames leaned higher now, bright enough to paint the whole room gold, and from the corner of his eye, he saw her again. She wasn't standing this time. She was sitting mirroring him perfectly. Every time he breathed, she did. Every time he turned his head, she followed. But she wasn't outside the circle anymore. She was inside. He blinked hard, shaking his head. No, you can't be in here." Her smile was small, almost tender. "You brought me." Marcus backed away until the salt line pressed against his spine. "What do you want?" Her face flickered in the light. One moment it was his sister's soft, familiar human. The next, the skin shimmered like wax melting, eyes sinking deeper into the sockets until only the glow remained. "I want to go home," she said. "This isn't your home." "Then give me yours." The wind rose again, though there were no windows now. It circled the room like an invisible tide, scattering the last of the salt, lifting it into the air. The grains sparkled like dust, dissolving into nothing as they swirled around the circle. The boundary was gone. Marcus could feel it, the shift, the absence of protection. His sister, or the thing wearing her shape, stood fully now, her eyes twin flames burning from inside her skull. Her skin flickered like candlelight, thin layers of shadow moving beneath. Marcus stepped backward until his heel hit the wall. "Anna," he whispered, "you're gone. I saw you go." "Then why do I remember the fire?" she said softly. "Why do I remember you standing outside, watching the house burn?" He froze. "That's not true," he said. "I tried to. You left me there." Her voice cracked, splintering into two tones, one human, one deeper, ancient. "You called my name," she said, "but you never came inside." "I couldn't." Her laughter was quiet, hollow. "And now you have." The flames burst outward in a ring, engulfing the room in golden fire. The air shimmered like molten glass, and for a moment, Marcus could see her, his real sister, standing in the center of it all, hair burning without smoke, eyes pleading. "Finish it," she said. "Say it again." He covered his ears. "No, if you don't, it'll stay open." What will?" The walls began to move, stretching and twisting like fabric. Faces appeared in them, distorted, half-formed, their mouths opening in silent screams. "What's happening?" "They're waiting," Anna said. "You called all of us." Marcus shook his head violently. "No, I only said your name." Her smile was sad. "But you said it wrong." The flames guttered, dimmed, and died. Darkness fell. The heartbeat grew louder. And then one by one, the candles reignited on their own. But there weren't 4 anymore. There were 3. The one nearest him burned black, its flame rising straight and silent. He could smell something under the wax now, iron and salt. He realized too late that the wax dripping down the side wasn't wax at all. It was blood. From where he sat, it looked like the candle was bleeding onto the floor, and the pool spreading outward was inching toward his feet. He scrambled back, slipping on the slick wood. The liquid followed, dragging itself forward as though pulled by gravity from somewhere deeper than the floorboards. He backed into a corner. The light dimmed again, and then, out of that liquid, something began to rise. A shape, a body. It was hers, Anna's, but wrong. Her limbs were too long, her neck bent too far. Her head tilted backward until her face stared at the ceiling. Mouth open in a silent scream, she whispered through broken teeth. "You should have let me burn." Marcus pressed himself against the wall, shaking his head, tears streaking his face. "You're not her. You're not." The figure snapped its head forward with a sound like glass cracking. "I am everything you refused to bury." He could feel it then, the heat returning, crawling through the floor, up the walls, into his veins. The flames and the candles leaned higher, white hot now, forming a circle around both of them. The light burned so bright that his shadow vanished. Edna stepped closer. "You wanted proof, didn't you?" she whispered. "You wanted to know if something waited on the other side." Marcus's voice broke. "Please stop. There's always something waiting," she said. "And now it's your turn to keep the door open." Her hand reached for his chest. He screamed, but the sound didn't reach his own ears. The instant her fingers touched him, the world folded inward. Light and dark collapsed together. The fire roared once, and then went out. When he opened his eyes, everything was quiet. The apartment looked the same as before. Morning light filtered through the blinds. For a long moment, he thought he'd dreamed it. Then he saw the candles, 3 of them, still burning. Their flames didn't move, and on the 4th spot, the one that should have been empty, sat a hand, a human hand, pale and perfectly still, its fingers curled gently as though holding something invisible. Marcus stared at it until the smell of lilac and smoke filled the room again. Then, the hand twitched. He stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. The hand turned palm up, and a voice came from somewhere deep inside the walls, like the last one. The clock on the wall started ticking again. Sandilingurfen. There's a point, they say, when exhaustion and revelation become the same thing. When the brain, deprived of sleep and logic, begins to show you the world as it really is, not through reason but through fear. Marcus had reached that point. He didn't know how many hours had passed since the last time he'd closed his eyes. The clocks all said different things now. 3, 3, 2, 3 again. Time had become a wheel, spinning without moving forward. The 3 candles still burned, unwavering. The 4th space on the floor, the one that should have been empty, now held that hand. It looked human at first glance, pale as wax, perfectly preserved. But when the light shifted, the skin gleamed faintly, the way candle wax does just before it melts. He couldn't tell if it was his sister's hand or his own. He couldn't tell much of anything anymore. The air in the apartment had grown thick, viscous. He could almost feel it on his tongue, dust, salt, and something that tasted like memory. He wanted to move, to open the window or smash the candles and end it. But every time he tried, his body refused to obey. The room felt like it was holding him in place, as if he'd become one more part of the ritual. He sat still for a long time, listening to the sound of the wax dripping. Except, there was no wax. There hadn't been for hours. The flames didn't consume anything. They burned clean, endless, indifferent. Marcus whispered, "Anna." The hand twitched. He felt his throat tighten. "You wanted me to finish it." "I didn't. I won't." The hand flexed, fingers spreading. Something dark welled up from the cracks between them, liquid shadow pooling in the groove of his wooden floor, spreading slowly outward until it touched the edge of the circle. He backed away on his hands. "Stop. Stop that." "Mon." The shadow rippled, and from it came a whisper that sounded like his own voice. "You started this." He pressed his palms to his ears. "No. Yes. You wanted to see if there was something left. And now you know. The living are the ones who can't let go." The whisper grew louder until it seemed to vibrate the air itself. He squeezed his eyes shut. "What do you want from me?" The voice laughed softly, and he felt it move closer, not around him but inside him, like a thought he couldn't push away. "I want you to remember." The room tilted, not the way rooms tilt when you're dizzy, but the way an old photograph might warp when it burns, the edges curling inward, the center folding in on itself. He was no longer in his apartment. Not entirely. The walls shimmered, replaced by others. Familiar, peeling, faintly scorched. He could smell smoke, the faint sweetness of burnt fabric. He was standing in a doorway, now his sister's doorway, the one from that night. She was inside, sitting on the floor in her pajamas, crying. "Marcus," she said. Her voice was small, hoarse from smoke. "Help me." He took a step forward, but the floor buckled under his foot, the boards glowing red. "I can't," he whispered. "You could have," she said. Her eyes lifted toward him, and they caught the firelight in a way he'd never seen before, deep, molten, gold like candle flames. "Why didn't you?" He tried to answer, but the air turned thick, unbreathable. He fell to his knees, coughing, but no sound came out. The smoke twisted around him, coiling into shapes, faces, words. He reached out blindly, grasping for her, but his hand passed through her like water. When he looked down, his own skin was transparent. Veins of fire ran beneath it like glowing roots. He heard her voice again, closer this time, behind his ear. "You can't change what's done, but you can trade it." He turned, but there was only the hand on the floor again, pulsing faintly. It began to move, dragging itself toward the nearest candle. The flame dimmed. Something inside Marcus broke. He didn't shout, didn't beg. He simply stood, his movement slow, mechanical, as if he were being guided by someone else's muscle memory. He knelt beside the empty space where the fourth candle should have been. The hand rested there now, palm up, waiting. He stared at it for a long moment, his reflection flickering inside the polished skin. It looked almost kind, almost human. And then he saw what it held. A wick. Small, black, charred at the tip. He didn't remember picking up the lighter, but suddenly it was in his hand. His thumb pressed the metal wheel. The flame sputtered once, then caught. He hesitated, shaking. What happens if I do this? The whisper returned, faint and coaxing. Then it ends. He swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the tiny flame in his hand. Ends how? A pose. Time stops trying to forget you. He didn't understand what that meant. Maybe that was the point. He leaned forward and touched the flame to the wick. It lit instantly, but instead of rising upward, the fire folded inward, twisting down into the palm of the hand. The air rushed out of the room. Every sound collapsed into silence. The 3 existing candles flared, then began to burn backward the wax, climbing up their sides, reforming into smooth, unused shapes. He watched, horrified, as the flames reversed time itself. The air grew colder, younger. The apartment rebuilt itself in slow-motion, walls repairing cracks, floorboards unbuckling, the dust unfalling. He felt something deep inside him pulling apart. His memories rearranged themselves, looping backward through years. He saw his sister laughing at a dinner table, blowing out birthday candles, standing on a bridge at sunset. Then the memories began to reverse too fast, folding in on one another, collapsing into flashes of sound and color. Her voice, her scream, the sound of fire. He dropped the lighter and clutched his head, gasping. "Make it stop," the whisper answered. Soft, soothing. You wanted to undo it. This is what undoing feels like. The world was coming undone. The flames didn't give light anymore. They pulled it in, dragging every shadow toward their centers. The room's edges dissolved, revealing nothing beyond, only a slow swirl of ash and gold. Marcus couldn't tell if he was standing or falling. His hands were transparent now, his reflection flickering in the air like an image on old film. He saw himself in pieces, different versions of him, overlapping, repeating, looping the same gestures, lighting candles, drawing circles, whispering her name, each version a little less human, each one leaving less behind. "Anna," he whispered again. 1,000 voices whispered it back. The candle's light pulsed once, then dimmed to embers. He looked down. The hand was gone. In its place lay another flame, perfectly still, floating just above the floor. It didn't flicker or move. It was solid. He reached for it, and when his fingers brushed the surface, he felt warmth, alive, human warmth. And then he heard it. A heartbeat, but it wasn't his. It came from everywhere. He pressed his hand to his chest, but there was nothing there. No pulse. No sound. He looked up and saw her standing across from him. Anna. Oh, she was smiling now. Not cruelly, but with something close to love. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For finishing what I couldn't." And he shook his head. "No, I don't." The floor fell away. He was back in the circle, sitting cross-legged, exactly as he had been when he started. 4 candles burned evenly. The salt line was unbroken. The clock on the wall read 3. It hadn't moved. Everything was calm, except for the faint whisper that came from behind him, his sister's voice, low and weary. "Don't get up yet." He didn't. He sat perfectly still, the room frozen around him. The flames didn't move, the air didn't stir. He might have stayed there for seconds or hours, it didn't matter, because the ritual hadn't failed. It had simply reversed its direction. The candle didn't burn forward anymore. It burned backward, undoing time, one heartbeat at a time, erasing sound, breath, thought. Marcus closed his eyes, and the last thing he felt was the warmth of the flame against his face, and the faint, familiar scent of lilac. Then, quietly, it began to rain. Only it wasn't rain. It was ash, soft, white, endless. For the first time in days, the world looked still. Not peaceful still, like a photograph that had forgotten what movement was. Marcus sat where the circle had once been. The salt had vanished. The floor was clean, polished, faintly shining as if scrubbed by invisible hands. 4 candles burned before him, their flames tiny and perfect. They made no sound. He could see daylight pressing against the blinds, a soft, colorless glow, yet the room remained trapped in half-light. Dawn had come, but the sun had not. He wanted to believe that meant he had survived. His throat ached when he spoke. Anna. The name slipped into the air and stayed there, unblended with the silence, like a drop of ink in water that refuses to dissolve. She answered, at once, as if she had been waiting only for the sound of her name. Marcus. The voice was close. Not from the walls, not from the shadows, from the space just behind his shoulder where the air felt warm. He turned slowly. She was there. Not the flickering apparition that had haunted him for nights. Not the wax-skinned shape of anger and smoke, just Anna, the way she had been before the fire. Barefoot, hair braided over one shoulder, the faint dimple in her chin that only appeared when she smiled. She smiled now. Morning, she said softly. Marcus's breath broke in his chest. You're here, for a little while. Yeah. He stood, but the room swayed around him, and he sat again before his knees gave way. I finished it, he said. The candle had burned backward. Everything went back. You're free now, right? Her eyes lowered. The light from the candles slid across her skin like water and passed through. Free? She echoed. Yes, but freedom isn't the same as return. He shook his head. Then why are you still here? Because you lit the last one. And he didn't understand until he saw it, the faint line of flame running along his shadow. It glowed dull gold, the same hue as the candles, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Every ritual needs a vessel, she said. Something to carry the light back where it belongs. And that's me? She nodded once, sorrow softening her face. It has to be. I couldn't cross alone. He wanted to protest, but her expression silenced him, a mixture of gratitude and grief that left no room for argument. The candles began to dim one by one, their light bending inward like dying stars. With each extinguished flame, the room grew brighter, not darker. The color returned to the world, first to the floor, then to the curtains, then to her eyes. Marcus felt it in his bones. Dawn approaching, but not for him. Anna looked toward the window. Do you remember that morning? Before the fire? He nodded. You were making coffee. You said the house smelled like rain. She smiled faintly. You said it smelled like ashes. They both laughed, small, fragile sounds that trembled in the air. I waited for you, she said. When the smoke came, I thought you'd pull me out. He closed his eyes. I tried. I swear I did. I know, she whispered. That's why you called me back. You couldn't stand that you failed. He met her gaze. I didn't call you back to fix myself. I called you because I missed you. Her hand reached for his, stopping just short of contact. The warmth of it brushed his skin like the edge of a flame. And now? He looked at her, at the way the morning light clung to her shape but never touched the floor. Now I think missing you is better than losing you like this. A tear slipped down her cheek, bright as liquid glass. It fell, hit the floor, and sizzled away in a curl of smoke. The clock on the wall began to move again. The second hand ticked forward once, hesitant, then found its rhythm. 3:03 a.m. became 3:04, then 3:05. The loop was ending. Anna stood, and the motion filled the air with the scent of lilac. It's almost morning. Marcus followed her gaze to the blinds. The faint light outside had shifted, no longer gray but gold, a color he hadn't seen in days. He whispered, If you go, what happens to me? You'll stay, she said, but not for long. What does that mean? She smiled, gentle, almost amused. You'll see everything the way I saw it, from the other side of the glass. Not trapped, not lost, just watching. He felt panic rise, but her voice soothed it. This isn't punishment, Marcus. It's balance. You opened the door. You're the one who closes it." The flames shrank to the size of fireflies. He wanted to memorize her face, every line, every trace of the person she had been. But even as he looked, her features began to blur, light bleeding through them. "Tell me something," he said quickly. "Something real. Something I can keep." She leaned close, her breath cool against his ear. "Every time you dream of light," she whispered. "That's me." And then she was gone. The candles winked out together. For a heartbeat, the darkness was complete. Then the first true light of dawn crept through the blinds. Marcus stood. His body felt weightless, hollow, his movements slow as though underwater. He walked to the window and pulled the cord. The blinds lifted. Outside, the world was whole again, the street wet with last night's rain, the horizon streaked pink. Cars moved, birds stirred, life went on. He placed a hand against the glass. His reflection looked back at him, calm, color returning to his face, but the reflection didn't move when he did. It just smiled, faintly. "Anna," he whispered. The reflection smiled wider, and for a moment he saw her there, not behind him, but within him. Her eyes bright and still. He felt no fear, only the weight of understanding settling over him like dust. Hours later, maybe someone knocked on his door. The landlord, curious about the smell of smoke that no one else could detect. He called Marcus's name, got no answer, and let himself in. The apartment was immaculate. The windows open, the air cool and clean. On the table sat a small circle of unburned candles, perfectly white, perfectly new. In the center lay a single photograph. A man and a woman beside a lake, laughing, the sunlight cutting their faces in half. The landlord frowned, picked up the photo, and for just an instant, he thought he saw the man in it blink. When he looked again, the photo was still. Some nights, when the building is quiet, tenants say they hear a voice through the vents around 3 a.m. A man's voice, low and steady, speaking as if to someone just out of sight. They can never make out the words. But sometimes when the wind dies and the lights flicker, they catch the faintest trace of another voice answering. A woman's, soft, patient, like a lullaby whispered through candle smoke. And if they stay up long enough to see the first light of dawn, they say the world looks a little different, sharper, brighter, almost too perfect, as if someone had just finished cleaning the glass between this side and the other. 5 files, 5 sleepless hours, and still, the dark keeps more than it gives back. Maybe you've noticed something, a detail you can't unhear, a reflection that looks too steady, a candle that burned a little longer than it should have. That's the danger of listening after midnight. Sometimes, the story doesn't end when the broadcast does. If the air feels heavier now, if you sense someone standing just behind the noise, don't worry. It's only what's left of what you've invited in.